So, hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation. And my topic today is about COVID-19 worldwide vaccinations. So firstly, I choose 10 countries as the top of population ranking from the database to analyze and compare the result. And according to the pie chart, we can see that China, Indian, and American are relatively located ahead of the ranking. So China has more than 1.4 billion people, while Indian and American have like 1.38 billion and 0.32 billion respectively. So we will put more concentration on these three countries. So let's move to the infection part. According to the bar chart, we can see that American and the ERA still have the highest infection rate, which is more than 0.1. And apparently, China and Congo would be proud of their lowest infection rate, which is close to 0. So we can conclude that the travel restrictions and the quarantine policies have made their effort in most countries. However, due to the infection rate being so high in some countries, like USA, and people are still unable to travel internationally, as it would be easier to get infected in a certain country. Okay, so I will talk about the death rates. As we can see that Mexico has the highest death rate, which is around 8%. Maybe I think it's because there are poor medical techniques. And Mexico is still facing huge challenge in the future. However, India showed us the lowest death rate compared to other countries. I think that might because of incorrect data I collect. So let's see the world map. Brazil, India, and Mexico have the highest death amount, followed by Russia, which will decrease amount of deaths. And well, it looks like China and Australia did a fantastic job to save the dyings. Okay. So let's talk about vaccination. As we all know, vaccination is the most effective solution dealing with COVID-19. According to the graph, we can see that the vaccination rate in most countries is quite high, especially like China and the ERA. I think it's more. I think they has a rate of more than 0.7. But we need to pay attention to some less developed countries, such as Congo. The poor economic situation leads to the low vaccination rate, which is less than 0.01. Under this background, it's nice to see if some developed countries could share their additional vaccines with their developing countries. And in terms of the fully complete vaccination rate, we can see that the American and China have a high complete vaccination rate, and too small. And Iran and Congo are extremely low. This is also directly relevant to the economic conditions, I think. So here is a graph. It shows the fully complete vaccination rate divided by the total vaccination rate based on the recent research. if the second dose can't be injected on time after the first dose, the ability to resist virus will not be enough. So I think the government should encourage people to receive further vaccination on time. And the last one is about the different brand of vaccines. And according to the pie chart, we can see the highest percentage can be found in biotech Pfizer, which is around 42% and 42%. I think 84%. And the smallest number can be found in AstraZeneca, Oxford, and Sinovac. It's only like 5%. So it looks like people prefer the mRNA vaccines as their first choice. So this one is just a line chart. It shows how many vaccines were produced during the last 8 months in 4 different countries.
Okay, you've got a minute to wrap up.
Okay. So one more thing. So here is the link. You can make appointment for the vaccine, or you can just scan the QR code below. It will lead to the same website, and that's all. That's all for my presentation today. And thank you for your watching. Stay healthy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. That was good. Good, like, relevant data set. Interesting stuff. The use of the pie charts Viz library is nice. I haven't seen that before. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's the minding. It's not just I confess. Doesn't matter. Okay.
I think one of the things that's interesting that I would say is that you've shown that you can use a lot of different types of chart, but sometimes those weren't not the ideal type of chart for that type of information, if that makes sense. So you had a scatter chart and a line chart, both showing data that was probably better on a bar chart, but that's fine. It was nice to finish on the call to action of going to get vaccinated. I got my first one this morning, so if I drop dead halfway through this, then you kind of know why. Let's see what else. I think the one showing the difference between the mRNA vaccines was interesting. So that ring pie chart that you had, the next one up, go up to the next ring pie chart. Okay, so that line chart there, that's probably better as bar data.
Yeah.
Because when you've got a line, it's really is showing the slope of the line. That makes sense. That's the thing that you're communicating, and so it's showing a difference between the two things, which is quite interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting was that you kept referring to China and Congo, which was an interesting sort of pair of things to look at. And I think that you had this interesting situation with, so China's a sort of pretty well organized country, and they may or may not have very low transmission rates. We can kind of debate that, but I think it's pretty clear that Congo's low transmission rates are not because they're not transmitting. It's much more likely that they just have very poor government reporting.
Yeah.
And so it would be, I think it's an interesting one to kind of mention that whenever you're dealing with a data set like this, you've got to think about the reliability of that data. So when you say, okay, well, what's Congo doing? Does America have very bad vaccination rate? Does America have very bad infection rate, or does America just have very good testing? So those are kinds of interesting questions to bear in mind.
Okay.
I think the Mexican death rate one is a good thing highlight. That's interesting. Then the other question, I guess, is why did you highlight those particular countries? Why not any of the European countries or like any like Canada or?
Because
it's just
as I mentioned before, I only select like top 10 countries population. Mm-hmm. So I haven't done that part for other countries.
That's fine. That's an interesting one to think about. Like you've got what, Russia, Mexico, Congo, Iran. It's just an interesting like subset of countries to pick out. And it would probably be worth mentioning why you chose those particular ones. Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts while they were looking at this? I thought it was nice to have the emojis in there in the titles. It's good to kind of break it up and have a structure. Some of the graphs were a bit small, and I think you could have just bumped them up a bit just to make them a bit easier to read, because I had to kind of move my head in a bit closer to see the, particularly the like little line graphs and that kind of thing. Their title text is a bit small, just because the graph is a bit small.
Okay.
But otherwise, I thought that was a pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your feedback.
So, I did my data set on whale movements, specifically blue and fin whale movements in South California, because they've got a bunch of whale watchings, popular whale watching spots there apparently as well, which was quite interesting to find out. So, that's, never mind, ignore that. Some background information about the dataset and the whales. So this dataset was published in MoveBank for a study about the scales of blue and fin whale feeding habits, behaviors of California, USA, with implications for prey patchiness. It used intermediate duration archival tags, which were attached to 8 blue whales, 4 females, 3 males, and 1 of unknown sex, and 5 fin whales. 2 females, 1 male, and 2 of unknown sex as well. In the summers of both 2014 and 15, and these tags logged the different sets of data, including GPS locations, which I was using. So the tracking period for this, the tracking period for this data set, as I said earlier, was from the summer, August of 2014 to August 2015. And the 2 species you can see here that have been tracked are the blue whale and the fin whale. And in total, there are 13 whales that were tagged for this study. Here we have the distribution of how many whales per species in a pie chart. And then we've got the distribution of the sex of each whale in each species. I wasn't able to figure out how to add unknown there, but that's what the gray is. I've singled out the individual whale tag identifiers and gave them nicknames so it's easier to understand, and you can see the number of GPS, I guess the rows of the coordinates from the data, quite a varied range of data. We can find the deployment locations for the whales for both years, which you can kind of see by how they've all been condensed into 2 points. Here and now we can map the overall whales in South California. So in the summer months, when the waters are warmer, they bring high productivity to the coast of Southern California, where krill are found in high density, and obviously the blue whales and the fin whales feast on them until the warmer temperatures start to chill and they continue down towards Costa Rica. The krill prefer colder water and sea surface temperature, which results in cooler water attracting more krill. So in turn, we get more whales, which you can see in the whale data where you have a bundle of jagged and dotted points all clustered really closely together, which kind of shows where the patches of krill are and the feeding grounds are. You can see this in comparison from the 2 years, so 2014 and 2015. You can see how it seems that potentially the environmental environment of the ocean. The water temperature may have changed, or some other climate might have affected the movement and locations of the krill, which you can kind of see where it was originally down here in the Southern California bight, but now it's slowly moved up gradually up along the coast as well in the next year. Oh dear, there's a lot I haven't said. So now I went into further investigation into the movement speed, which could support which would further support the movements of the whales and their feeding grounds, which you can see in this interactive map where it maps out the speed of the whales and shows. So all the yellow sections and the green, you can kind of tell where the whales have been busy and moving faster to catch all their food. And it's patched out everywhere, so it's not necessarily all in the same area. It's in both years. I also did stop detection to find out the key major areas of where they were hunting for the krill as well. And you can see that in here. The key areas along the coast, they seem predominantly along the coastline, and this is probably because of I think it was upwelling. Hold on, sorry. Oh dear, I've lost it. Yeah, upwelling. So it's a process where currents bring deep cold water to the surface of the ocean, and because this deep water brings to the surface is often rich in nutrients, so on the coastal lines, this upwelling supports a huge growth of seaweed and plankton. So these areas they're highly rich in food for fish, marine animals, birds, and mammals, which makes sense considering all the whales are going along the coast, and it's perfect for whale watching. With all this information, it was just generalized over several whales. You can use that to focus on a specific whale. For instance, Moby Dick, I've named. This whale has the most data tracked for it, and we can see that. So Moby Dick is a blue whale, an adult, and a female. And here we have her trajectory being tracked and all the key major spots that she's stayed in for over 5 minutes to hunt for food, alongside the speed and trajectory. So you can see probably where all the yellow and green parts is where all the smaller, shorter areas of hunting are. Yeah, thanks. And I've got...
Okay. Okay, so does anyone want to jump in with anything before I get started? Nicole, could you very briefly talk about using a collab notebook?
Oh. Surprisingly, it's all right. It's quite good because then my laptop's not that it can't handle or support specific things sometimes. So we had to use this collab book to use for moving pandas because I had issues of installing it in the first place. The only tricky thing I find with this is that the kernel stops working when I leave it idle for a bit, or when I'm not running specific cells. So it does cause problems when I'm continuously working for a couple hours in goes, but it's quite useful if you need to use specific or install specific plugins or programs that you can't exactly do on your own laptop. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Only problem I have is that I can't save it properly on my binder link.
It's annoying. All right. I mean, just generally, I think that was great. Really interesting, really clear story. I think it was much more about the story and much less about the Python, so that was good. The what's the word for it? The moving panda stuff was really interesting. The way you were able to link it between the stops and the upwelling and the reasons that whales might be doing something is good. It's not just like, here are some whales, they moved around. It was like, here's a reason why whales move around, and here is some data that shows how they do it, which is great. It was a bit of a shame that you weren't able to get your presentation working, but whatever. And generally, I thought that was a very clear and coherent presentation. You spoke well. You hit all the points. Well done. So, who we got on the list? Who am I going to hit up?
Me.
Oh,
not me. Not me.
So me, whoever me is, what are your comments on this presentation?
I thought you were talking about who's going next. But I thought it was good. Yeah, I liked your graph, and I like the colors that you chose as well. They were nice because it reminds me of Wales.
Good one. All right. Does anyone else have any thoughts while we're here, or should we move on?
Begin?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, a flying fox from the run, because I'm talking about flying foxes and where they are and when they're going. So the Flying Fox Monitoring Program was implemented to collect information on the abundance and distribution of the flying fox population in eastern Australia. The data provides an indication into population trends and other ecological factors. The monitoring of flying foxes is especially important as two species, the grey-headed flying fox and the spectacled flying fox, are listed as threatened. The Australian government put $6 million towards Hendra virus research. Hendra virus is a bat-borne virus that affects horses and then can be passed on to people. So monitoring the flying foxes also helps inform response to concerns about potential Hendra outbreaks. The data set describes Queensland's known flying fox routes and the magnitude of flying foxes by species. So these are 4 species that are in the data set. So the black flying fox, the grey-headed flying fox, the little red flying fox, and the spectacled flying fox. In the Flying Fox Monitoring Program, the flying foxes at small camps are counted directly, while area-based methods are used at larger camps. The counts were conducted at all known camps for the grey-headed flying fox and the spectacled flying fox. Counts were also carried out for the little red and black flying foxes within those regions. And all data sets were retrieved from data.gov.au. So what is a roost/camp? A roost or a camp is a patch of trees which flying foxes are found in during the day, but I refer to it as a camp throughout the project. By using the data, I want to explore where flying foxes are mostly populated, how they are distributed throughout Queensland and the abundance of them, and the change in population over time. So I did some importing and applied some file states, and then I read and joined my data sets. So these are all the data sets that I joined together, and from that I got 1,763 rows and 13 columns. So in each row in the data is one survey. So this is my data, so you can see all the columns. So general review of where flying foxes are. The Gold Coast and Brisbane. Oh, so this is my notes have disappeared. I'm sorry. So the Gold Coast has the most flying fox camps. So from that, I wanted to visualize. From this graph, I wanted to visualize where those camps are on a map. So yeah. So I made mapping of Queensland and the city points, and then I created the geometry, longitude and latitude in the columns with the point geometry. So from that, I got this map. So from this map of the known camp locations, you can see that they tend to stay near water sources. So that's why they're mostly along the east coast. At the camp far from the east coast, there is a lake that runs through it. That's why flying foxes can be seen there. Flying foxes also like high density tree locations like forests and swamps. So the map can also give an indication of where those are. So that's just what I got from it. So from the map, I was curious about the distribution of each flying fox species across these areas. So I created this bar graph. This bar graph describes the total number of each species across each LGA. You can see that despite the Gold Coast having the most camps shown from the bar graph and the map, other LGAs have more flying fox populations. So the Gold Coast doesn't have as many compared to like Fraser Coast and like Noosa. The graph shows that the proportion of each species. So there's quite a lot of little red and barely any spectacled flying foxes. I found it interesting that despite grey-headed flying foxes being considered threatened, some areas have more grey-headed flying foxes compared to black flying foxes. Another thing I found interesting is that in the LGI of Isaac, it has 7 camps, but in only little red flying foxes can be found in those. Yeah. Distribution of each flying fox species, distribution of flying fox species each year. So I wanted to compare how those numbers changed over time. So I subsetted the data frame by each year and then grouped the needed columns by each government area and then created subplots to compare the results. So from that, I got these graphs. So from comparing the graphs, you can see that the number of flying foxes dropped quite dramatically from 2016 to 2019. So in 2016, they had nearly 500,000, and then in 2019, they were only just reaching 120,000. Another thing I noticed that Central Highlands Regional wasn't an LGA that wasn't counted until 2017. So in 2016, that wasn't there. Also in 2018, a lot of flying foxes moved from the Gold Coast, and no little reds were observed at all. So in the Gold Coast, the numbers decreased quite significantly. I also noticed that some of the camps had no flying foxes in them at all from 2016 to 2019. So I went and saw how many. So I grouped my data frame by the name of the camp, as because I have multiple years. Some of the camps are in there twice, so I didn't want to count those. I then found all the camps that had the total number of all species equaling 0. So from 2016 to 2019, they monitored 294 non-flying fox camps, but only had 206. But only 206 had flying foxes in them. So there were 88 camps that have no foxes in them. So I wanted to see if there was any correlation in location. So this is the map I got. The camps got tighter, so they were more towards the East Coast. But other than that, I couldn't see much correlation. So now that I know where the flying foxes actually are, I wanted to map how they are distributed across the known camps. So I divided the data frame into the columns that I needed, so by each species, and then created the point geometry, and then I got these maps. So black flying foxes and little red foxes are more distributed across, the camps are more distributed across Queensland. This is probably due to the abundance of them compared to the other 2 species. Grey-headed flying foxes are mostly in the Brisbane Gold Coast areas and less spread out, and there are very few spectacled flying fox camps, but that's due to how little there are of them. So you can see how small of an amount spectacled flying foxes have. So I wanted to see how these numbers, the abundance of them changed over time. So I got this graph. So you can see that the drop of little red flying foxes was quite dramatic at the beginning of 2016. This may have been due to the fact that they monitored grey-headed and spectacled flying foxes, the regions they're in. So those little red flying foxes might have moved out, but also it never returned to the amount that they initially had. So that might suggest that some of them died. So extreme heat waves, bushfires, cyclones and droughts can all have effect on flying foxes. Bushfires happened around here, so that may have had an effect on the black flying foxes and the little red flying foxes. You can also see Brisbane had a heat wave, and that caused a decline in the grey-headed flying foxes, and from the maps earlier, you could see that grey-headed flying foxes were mostly in Brisbane. And the spectacled flying foxes only have a small number in 2019, and other than that, there weren't any. So the distribution and abundance of flying fox numbers. So I created this graph. The dots represent the quantity of flying foxes, and the shaded plots show the density of the camps. So in 2016, they had like a group of 500,000, and then some medium-sized groups, and then a lot of smaller groups, and they were a bit spread out along. In 2017, they got less spread out, and there was one big group of 500,000, and then they had mostly little groups compared to the medium-sized groups in 2016. In 2018, it was the most condensed, and then large groups are now only 100,000 instead of 500,000, showing population drop. And then in 2019, they spread out again, and the numbers were down again. And you can see that they're quite dense together, the smaller camps. Oh, yeah. I'm done.
Nice, thank you. So, if you had to kind of come up with a takeaway, you're like, someone asks you a question in the lift or something like that, whatever a lift is, and like, well, what did you learn from the data set? What would be the thing, like the headline you would say to them?
That they like to stick to the East Coast because it's easy access to water sources, and also urban areas have easy access to food.
Okay, urban areas. So they're like, I guess there's more fruit trees in people's gardens, right?
Yeah.
All right. Anyone want to jump in while I have a little think? I think it was good to see you like working with all these multiple data sets. It was really nice to see you doing those density charts at the end, and those multi-plot things were very good for the like year-to-year comparisons. The drop in foxes that you were showing, flying foxes that you were showing, was good. I think that was a really nice point that you were making, but you didn't lock the y-axis, so it actually ends up looking, because the y-axis number changes at the scale that you're showing it on a screen like this, it's very difficult for a not super engaged viewer to see that as an increase, because the y-axis is going down, so the bars are getting taller.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's worth locking that y-axis if you're trying to point out a change of scale. But I think you spoke through it well, so that wasn't so much of a problem. But if you were going to publish that in a magazine or something like that, people would miss the point, and they would fall down on that. What else have we got here? The line graph was nicely annotated. It's good to put like events on there. There was a kind of amazing number of from that first spike, the first green spike that disappeared and then didn't ever come back again. Knowing where all of those bats have gone would be super interesting. Have you been down to the camp on Wallow Creek?
No.
Oh, it's worth a look. It's very cool. But it would be interesting to know. It'd be nice to think that they'd just like flown across the border and weren't living in Queensland anymore. But hopefully they didn't all just cark it.
Yeah, they probably did. They people you're allowed to shoot them in Queensland,
right.
like orchids up to like 50,000, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so there is a good chance that they died.
That would suck. So, Anton, did you have any thoughts?
Just one. With the line graph which showed the decline in flying foxes, Was there a reason why there was sudden peaks later on? Sorry, I might have missed it, but was there a specific reason why there was peaks later on after the initial decline?
Migration.
Okay.
Yeah. So those ones are the little reds, and they migrate a lot between. So they migrate all along the east coast of Australia. So they probably went from like New South Wales to Victoria in those months, especially as it gets hotter. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So those, if you had what's it called, much higher resolution data, you'd be able to see those migration patterns, I guess.
Yeah. I also realized I made my graph on my monitor, so everything was really big for me. And then when I did my presentation yesterday, I realized everything was tiny.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to learn, is that actually things don't come out as clearly as you can, as you imagine. The same thing happens with grays. So when grays look good on your screen, but then when you print them on paper, they're invisible, and that kind of thing. So yeah, getting some practice in on your final presentation medium is well worth it. Okay. Yeah, please go.
Alright, so I'm Orchhna and I like ramen. It comes in different sizes, shape and color, and some flavors are funkier and some brands are more popular. But lately I have been wondering what the ultimate flavor and brand might be. So after searching far and wide across the land of the internet, I stumbled across Wiener, World Instant Noodle Association, an organization that often holds World Instant Noodle Summits to do important things such as collecting and distributing data about the noodle industry. So here is a small sample of the many things they collected. This is a small set that records the global demands of countries and regions from 2016 to 2020. So I wanted to gain some insights, so I graphed it into a bar graph. I isolated China because China is an outlier and their data just didn't match the other countries' range. From this graph, as you can see, an increase in demand, particularly in the year 2020, which is most likely due to COVID-19. And being that ramen is a low cost and simple dish, most households would want to keep it in stock during lockdown. Featured within this graph are 10 more countries. Some of these demands are different. For example, in Indonesia, their demands are decreasing, and in India, it's somewhat rapidly increasing. And it may be due to external factors that these countries are facing. For example, in the Philippines, in the year 2018, they had an increase of demands, and this is most likely due to a typhoon that had happened in the northern regions, whereby instant noodle helped improve the food shortage issue. And then I found a statement on the website that they donated to the Red Cross. Yeah. So, considering this data wasn't enough to satisfy my curiosity, I continued searching and came across a dude named Hans. He's been rating ramen for a living since 2002, so for as long as I have lived. Therefore, I used his sacred data set to guide me to my answer. This ancient logbook consists of more than 2,000 entries that records the brand, variety, style, country, star rating, and his top 10 favorites. So I wanted to see how multicultural Hans really was. Oh, wait, no. I wanted to see the ramen flavors that are within this list. So I have taken out I have taken out a list of words from the variety section and create a word cloud of all the most frequent flavors, and currently you can see that chicken is the most popular. I then got a bit fancy and what's good? Got a bit fancy and placed the word cloud into the shape of a bowl. Right, yes. Okay, then I want to see how multicultural Hans really was by lollipop graphing the value counts of each country's review. And featured in this graph are three countries that stand out. Japan first, second being United States, and South Korea being the third most reviewed country. I then became curious with the smaller reviewed countries and plotted some bar graphs. So first, we have Australia. And considering Australia's beef industry somewhat contributes largely to our economy, I thought that the beef flavor would be highly rated. And what do you know? Fusion Special Edition Ao Spicy Cow Mee Goreng is rated with 5 stars, followed by a basic original flavor by Mee Goreng. And then we have the worst rated being crispy bacon flavor. And considering I live in Australia, I did a Google search for Maggie Ao Spicy Cow's flavor and saw that Woolies had sold them, but since they are limited edition, this line has been discontinued. Next, I did India, and it was no surprise that masala was ranked first with 5 stars because Indians do love their spices. And then second, followed afterwards, was top ramen atta noodles, masala again. And then third was atta noodles, japat, banor, bikar, kal. Yeah. I did a Google translate of that sentence, and it translated with just, pardon? Oh, it just translated with instant bakery and eat. So I'm guessing it's just an original flavor. I then graphed United Kingdom, and their top rated was Shaolin monk vegetables, followed by Hong Kong street beef, and then authentic street food satay, and then a creamy shrimp tom yum flavor. And then lastly, I graphed Mexico, and their top rated flavor was the gourmet sabor Alcado de Cameron, which was a shrimp broth flavor. So yes, after seeing the ramen ratings, after seeing those bar graphs, I was curious about his top 10 flavors. Therefore, I graphed a word cloud, and it was to my surprise that chicken was no longer the most popular, and his most liked is curry, followed by Singaporean noodles and ramen and laksa. So then I want to explore the most common brands, and I did a tree map of his most frequent brands reviewed, and it shows here within the area that is most the area that is the greatest, that Nissan is the most frequent reviewed brand. So then I wanted to see if Nissan was good with their recipes. Pardon? This is all
cutting into your feedback.
Okay. I wanted to see if Nissan was really good with their recipes, and so I graphed a tree map of his top 10 brands, and it was no longer Nissan who was the reigning champion, it was Prime Taste. So yeah, in summary, there is no ultimate flavor nor ultimate brand because we all have different taste buds, and this data set was biased because it was mainly based on Han's experience with ramen. So therefore, there is no best, and it's all up to your taste buds. Thank you.
All right, cool. So that was a good and varied exploration of instant ramen. A good topic to be talking about. I like the idea that he's been rating ramen for as long as you have lived.
Yeah.
So a couple of big interesting things in there. First off, let's talk about word clouds. What is it that you think is good and bad about word clouds?
It's good because it's interesting to see all the words bundled up together. It looks cool, but the worst thing about it is that you can't really specifically pinpoint which flavor was the most frequent, because it's all about the how you perceive how big the sizes are. So it doesn't really give you an accurate representation of what is most frequent. Yep, that is why I used a tree map for the top brands.
Okay, I mean, it's not very cool or exciting, but when you're dealing with kind of comparison data, bar charts are basically the answer for everything. Tree maps are more of a way of showing hierarchical data. So the perfect case for a tree map would be okay, well, I want to show the distribution of sub-brands according to their parent brand, for instance. Let's say Nissin makes 4 different types of noodle, and you want to show the ranking of those noodles as well by the color or something like that. And then you'd be able to see that each box, maybe Nissin makes lots of noodles, but they're all very low rated, or they make lots of noodles and they have a variety of ratings or something like that. So it's just a kind of case of thinking about what is the way of getting the information across in the clearest way possible. It's good that you've done these things because it's good to explore what they do. But I think long term, if you were going to make a ramenrater.com or something like that, which has lots of graphs about the current state of the ramen world, bar charts are probably the answer, unless you want to show a more a deeper, more complex analysis.
Yeah.
It was good to talk about the bias in your data, given that it all comes from one source. I think that was super interesting. The idea that you might want to have a diversity of ramen rating people, because he's probably, people rely on him. He's maybe the most important person in instant ramen in the world, which is really fascinating. The big spike in Vietnam's ramen consumption in 2020, I think, was it 2019, was kind of interesting. The rise in instant noodle consumption in India was super interesting.
Yeah.
You had a great energy when you were presenting, and that's always really nice to be okay, this person cares about this subject, so maybe I should care too. And with the lollipop, I think it was good. Yeah, sorry, you did a good thing with separating out the China from all the other countries, because the other countries just wouldn't have been visible, I think. But I think it might have made more sense to show that graph to begin with, than to explain why you separated them. Because it was not totally clear that the reason that you separated them was because they were 3 or 4 powers of 10 out of range of everyone else. It took me a couple of seconds to realize that they weren't different for some other reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I think generally pretty good analysis of ramen ratings. Did you have any other? Did you have a moment of insight, being oh, that's super interesting?
Yes, actually, I found something else that I didn't include because I forgot that there is such thing as canned ramen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did know that before, but now I do, and it doesn't look nice. Nor does it have a high rating. It's rated 2 stars, and it's from Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not going to butcher the name because I just can't remember it clearly.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so my data was data which processed the crime in Atlanta between 2009 and 2017. Just to note, the data does stop on the 2nd of February 2017, so this has an effect on some of my data, but I managed to cull those indexes. It was created by the Atlanta Police Department, and this leaves there to be a possibility of bias due to police trying to distort facts, but this can never be proven. And for my rapper data, I use data from Wikipedia, which was created by Raya, who gives the accreditations and gold and platinum awards to the artists. So why would I choose these data? Well, I wanted to first understand the correlation between growing glorification of gang violence and hip hop culture to the increased crime and the increased nonviolent and violent crimes. And why Atlanta specifically? Well, Atlanta is home to notorious gang rappers known such as 21 Savage, Lil Baby, Migos Future, and it is also worth noting that King Von was recently shot here in 2020 as part of a gang-related incident, and he is known as one of the pioneers of violent rap. Okay, so how does crime look like in Atlanta? Well, this is how it looks like. So the main crimes are based on theft. So we have auto theft, vehicle larceny, and larceny non-vehicle, which are the main crimes. But there is an underlying violent crime nature with there's home invasion and there's also homicides. Okay, so how does monthly crime look like? To start, I just wanted to look at how monthly crime looked like just to see what's actually happening in Atlanta. And a few notable points is this 2016 month. There's a start of year dip for every crime, and this is most likely due to the peaks right before that in end of year seasons, with Christmas and Thanksgiving having high levels of theft and burglary just because there is more people out and more people about to steal from. A few notable points of this graph: there is a spike mid 2009, and this happens to coincide with the 2009 release of Fast and Furious. There's also less of a dip in the beginning of 2016, which is most likely related to the presidential elections, with Trump having his first run for president. So zooming in a bit closer, we can see that there was a major spike in 2009 relating to robbery commercial and robbery residential, and there was also a massive dip in the beginning of 2012, while there is a general decrease of crime. So what did I analyze here? Well, first I wanted to see if this had any relation to rappers. So I checked what was released here, which had album releases by big rappers such as Eminem, Warren G, Old Dirty Bastard, 50 Cent, Gucci Mane, and Snoop Dogg, with 3 of the albums in this period being released at the top 10 billboards. And I wanted to do the same for 2012, where there was a similar amount of rap albums released, but they were from less notable artists such as Tyga, Biz Markie, Ja Rule, and Too Short. So I began to see some of a connection here, and only 2 of the artists here were listed in the top 10 billboards. Zooming even closer into the crime statistics, I began to see a trend between homicide and rape, where homicide was the only crime to somewhat stay the same, while rape is on a slight increase. This rape increase may be because of more victims coming out about their rapes, which could be a positive, just to see comfort in reporting their own experiences. I was not able to see any correlation with crime, with rappers, as we can see now. So when I began analyzing rappers, I first wanted to see who was from Atlanta and what they've done. So I got a rapper list from the Raya Certified website, and I collected how many of them, and these are the certifications they received that were above a gold level. So we have T.I., Ray Shremmerd, Migos, Ludacris, and Future. Future was obviously the most. And I want to see how this correlates to crime. So I checked how many units were sold in this period, which you can see there was 7 million units sold between 2010 and 2018, and it was only going up. And then to further explore this, I wanted to see how many certifications were given. This is where I became a bit confused because the gold level certifications actually went down as 27 hit, and platinum had a spike in 2015, but it still dipped down and started to maintain. And I realized a lack of correlation between my two data sets, and this is where I was really confused on what to do. So I wanted to start fresh by exploring what was actually happening in Atlanta. Okay, so we know that rape and homicide levels were relatively similar, and by 2016 there was a half of almost every crime. There was a decrease in every crime except rape and homicide, and I was wondering what this was because of. Yeah, so there's many reasons why this could be because, and to check this, I wanted to check the locational analysis of this. So what I realized from the location was that the crimes followed a similar trend where theft-related crimes are following road maps of Atlanta. So they see roads that move inwards and there's a central location, while burglary and home invasion obviously stick to the neighborhoods. To better visualize this, I did a hex spin of the larceny data, which is the theft-related data. And from this, we can see there are road networks that move in slowly into the central nucleus. And then there's also smaller clusters at the intersection of road points in Atlanta. There also is a small cluster of larceny-related crimes here, which I later found out was because of the airport located there. And so there's just a cluster of crimes down separated from the rest of the city because of the airport. So then I did a population density to see how all of this would fit. And it turns out even in the center city, the crimes are still centralized. So the data collected previously was just for the center area. And it shows that all the data and all the traffic moving into the city still converges at a crime center here. To further prove this fact, I used a pie chart, which I tested the ranges, and I found that the overwhelming majority of the crime is within a 10-kilometer range of the center city. So here I was stumped and I didn't know what to do with my rappers. So I thought I would explore the data a bit further. So I created a folium map of where the homicides are, because this was the most notable crime that is committed in rap songs. So looking at the folium map, I noticed a trend between 3 locations: Bankshead, Old Forth, and East Point. And I realized the majority of the crimes are in this one triangle that is encapsulated by these 3 cities. And then doing a bit more further research, I got some of the locations of previous and current rappers to see where they lived in Atlanta, and I realized there was a list of very famous names that were all within this one triangle, and this includes 21 Savage, which I was able to plot here because he had his coordinates given, and his neighborhood is also notorious for being one of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods. And also amongst this triangle, there is 21 Savage's house, the Dungeon family house, 2 Chainz, Gunna, and a few more artists. And here is when I began to realize a switch in my story, because I was trying to prove that these rappers influence these areas, but instead I proved the opposite, that the areas influence the rappers, and their music is just a result of their circumstances. And I correlated this to the drop in crime because I was thinking that instead of rappers promoting crime, by showing an alternative to crime, they're able to inspire other people within their communities to take different routes, and that's why from 2009, which was the start of the rappers, there was a higher crime rate, and then towards the rappers' peaks at 2017 and 2016, there was a lowered amount of crime. And just for a little bit further exploration, I wanted to see how other crimes were affected. So another smaller crime, oh, sorry. Yeah, so another smaller crime that was not really shown earlier was rape, and I just wanted to see if there was a similar trend. And again, we can see that there was the same triangle drawn between these three areas that encapsulates the majority of crime. Another interesting thing I found, especially with the rape, was that there is areas such as these where there are little gaps. This one encapsulates a cemetery, and there also is higher expense housing in this area. Yeah, and as said before, there are some crimes that happen towards the bottom of the map, and that is because of the airports located there. So in conclusion, I proved the converse of what I was originally trying to prove, and instead of rappers influencing the people influence the rappers, and they are doing something positive in the sense that people are finding alternatives to the crime that was previously seen. Thank you.
All right, nice one. Okay, so just be careful with the concept of proof, because it's always a bit tricky. But you've somewhat disproved your initial hypothesis, which is a nice thing to show. It's always good to be brave enough to say, well, I thought something, and then the data showed that I was wrong.
Yeah.
I think it was good that you clarified where you got your data from. You mentioned some bias. You've got data from a couple of sources. That gun word cloud is horrifying, but that's fine. I like the idea that Fast and Furious caused that spike in crime. That would be something to explore. And that hex bin was super interesting because it showed one of the problems you've got with that folium graph is that you've got pins all over it, so it's very difficult to see. Whereas the hex bin graph is like, okay, here's like the density of those points over the that one. So the idea that you've got very intense areas of, is that just that's like theft basically, right?
Yeah, so I did theft-related crimes because it was with the other types of crimes, it would fill in all the areas because it was an even spread. But theft-related crime sticks to the road networks.
Right. Okay, that makes sense because you need to be on a road to nick a car.
Yeah.
Cool. Does anyone else have any thoughts in general? I thought it was very good that you came up with the conclusion that the rappers were influenced by their environment. I think that's something that is a great thing to demonstrate. All right.
For my data project, I focused on crime data, mainly analysing the suburb-based crime statistics against a person or property. And the data range from 1st of July of 2019 to the 30th of June in 2020 for South Australia. And starting off with my crime statistics table, it shows the dates in which crimes occurred and the three subcategories that came with each offence. And something interesting that actually struck my attention was that the recorded number of offences was actually a lot higher than I expected, with each row here accommodating for one crime each day. As you can see, the reported date, and as you slide across, it shows the 3 levels of offences with one crime. And so overall with my table, there were over 95,000 rows of offences, and that obviously results in 95,000 crimes just across 2019 and 2020 in South Australia.
And so starting off, I have the top 10 crimiest suburbs of South Australia, with Port Adelaide at the highest with almost 3,000 offences. And this plot graph can kind of clearly demonstrate that Adelaide was a clear outlier in contrast to other suburbs, with a far higher number of offences than anyone else, and with almost 130 offences per every 100 residents. And I actually found that Port Adelaide specifically was recorded as the second highest number of crime rates, with the second highest number of crime rates. And next up, I had the top 10 days with the highest number of offences. And I actually discovered that, or realized that around February and March of 2020, where most of these statistics are showing higher numbers of offences, COVID-19 or Corona was progressively spreading and lockdowns were approaching at this time. And in this graph, it kind of can explain the increased number of crime rates from 2019 to 2020, with high numbers of family violence, damage against property, and theft due to the global pandemic that I guess kind of conflicted people's headspaces, and obviously was a huge kind of psychological experiment to every individual, with overall increased rates of loss of income, loss of jobs, and obviously escalated time spent inside a house with family members, and I guess more or less dragging people to go insane, and kind of thus explaining the rates of offences against property, which increased with more people obviously were inside and lesser people were, I guess, outside to be kind of more observant or concerned with any like theft or damage against their properties. And for this piece of data, there were 3 categories for certain types of offences, and across states and countries, the levels of offences are obviously different, but they're generally assessed by 1, summary or simple offences, 2, minor indictable offences, and 3, major indictable offences. But for this collection of data that I found, there was levels 1, 2, and 3, which kind of differentiated the consequences and like obviously depending on their severity. But starting off with like level 1 offences, the consequences can include time imprisonment, and for example here, damage of property can attract up to 5 to 6 years imprisonment. And for level 2 offences, which can be much more serious, and an example here is robbery, which can range from 10 to 25 years imprisonment. And finally, we have level 3 offences, which obviously are deemed most serious, such as here, top one, which had a low number, but it was murder, which can attract up to a maximum penalty of life in prison. And that was what I discovered from the crime statistics of South Australia. And that's my data project.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna hit some other people for questions because we've got plenty of time for feedback. So I want everyone else to think about what they're gonna ask. So when I ask you, don't sit there looking silly. Just a quick thing. What was the difference between level 2 homicide and level 3 homicide?
I think that the difference can be like, I guess, kind of how serious the situation would be and how how much damage it causes to the person, or
Okay.
yeah, and depending on like the
So
situation that it would be
probably
in, I
the
think,
the related offences part of it.
yeah.
Okay, let's get into it. So I reckon first thing I would say, just like when you're presenting, maximize your window just so that you
Oh, sorry.
make most of your thing. You
Sorry,
can just
yeah.
press F11 and it will chuck it into full screen. The highest offence days stuff, that little section of it I thought was kind of interesting, but a little bit unclear as to what it is that we're actually looking at. So that one is like, that is like, okay, there's some days here, and I would expect that to lead into a kind of, here's the number of crimes per day for the whole year.
Right.
And so look, we can see this is where the peaks are, or this is, do you know what I mean? Like, what is common about those days? It's very difficult to read those. Like, okay, well, a lot of them are 2019, some are 2020, that kind of thing. So what are we reading there? And then the next graph along, I wasn't really sure what that was showing, because it seems to decrease quite seriously over time.
Yeah.
Does that mean that in both years, February had a lot of crime and the other years didn't have so much? Is that what it's saying?
Yeah, I think so. And it's kind of confusing down like kind of the like where the dates are, because the dates weren't like in order, because like my graph obviously went in like descending order, but when I put it into the things, it kind of just it's not like in chronological order down the bottom, so it's kind of confusing. But I guess it just decreased over the time. But I just
that's fine. That's one of the things I wanted to check, was like, it seemed odd that like everything kept going down towards the end of the year. Actually, they're not in order. Okay, that's cool. I think it would be interesting to see that done with a in order kind of way.
Yeah, definitely.
See, like, what does it look like over the year?
Yeah.
Like, is there a crime season? That kind of thing. Like, if I was organizing a police station, would I be like, okay, everyone take your time off during like no crime season or something like that?
Yeah.
I want everyone back for, I don't know, they don't have state of origin in SA, do they? But it's a neat little graph. It would just be interesting to see that, like, with an actual chronological thing, and you can then, like, I don't know, highlight when those high crime days are and what types of things are being done on those crimes.
Yeah, and why I would like peak in that season or something.
Yeah. It might be interesting to do something along the lines. Just thinking about it, like, if you got 3 points for a level 3 crime and you got 1 point for a level 1 crime, what is the crimiest day of the year? You know what I mean? Like, if everyone goes out, like, gets done for nicking some pick and mix, then that's one type of crimey day. But if everyone goes out and murders someone, that's a different type of crimey day.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of interesting. What else have we got? Oh, that's cool. Okay, right. So let's see. Who else have we got? Who is kicking around? Max, are you there? What did you think? Give me some feedback. Oh, one more thing, Soda. Did your graph have any? Can you take us to the little bit where it talks about what the data actually looks like, the little head of your data set?
Oh, at the crime table. Yeah, it was a bit confusing because, like, I don't know why I had like Adelaide as like the suburb. Like, it was Port Adelaide that kind of was the actual suburb, and obviously Adelaide is like a city, so it kind of didn't make sense for why that was suburb, but it like made sense for the area, I guess.
It's probably like City of Sydney is Sydney, and then like Redfern is a different city. I thought that was interesting. Your data on that was per cap, right? So there's just a lot more crime in Adelaide rather than there's just more people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And how did you normalize it by per capita? Does it come normalized per capita, or did you do that?
Like, you mean this one?
Yeah. So is that like 3,000 offences or 3,000 offences per 10,000 people?
That was like 3,000 offences, like overall for 2019.
Oh, okay.
Like
So it's
just
not,
for the entire. It's
not
not per like 100 residents.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be super interesting to see that, like, in a kind of per capita way.
Yeah.
And then also, I guess, I wonder if it would be one of those things you could stick on a map, where you just
Yeah.
color in the suburbs by amount of crime, because I don't know if Adelaide's just throwing it off, but it looks like it's a fairly flat thing. So like, crime happens in the middle, no crime happens anywhere else.
Yeah.
I wonder what the distributions of different types of crime are as well. Like, do they do the most? Do they just murder people in Adelaide?
Yeah.
And then only stealing out in the suburbs? Is it like showing up at someone's cellar door and pinching their wine? All right, who else? Who else have we got? Timothy, did you have any thoughts on this presentation? Was that you, Max? Were you about to say something?
My mic was out of battery. Yes, I have a wireless mic. I'm an idiot. I've always been interested in suburb crime. Like in Sydney, I'm always worried about when the next thing's gonna happen and like focus on where I'm not too well versed for Adelaide, but it's really interesting to see the disparity between types of crimes based on different suburbs. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, so that types of crime is an interesting one to think about. Cool.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and before we start, I want to talk about myself a bit so that it helps you understand the graphs better. And I'm from Korea, and I'm an introvert, so I suck at starting a conversation. So I often leave people on red, as showing in the picture, as well as ghosting and dry texting. However, I always make new friends every year who help me going through my life, as social life is such an important factor with all of our lives. I'm sure we all use social media like Facebook and Instagram to keep those relationships. So today my question is, how does social media reflect my life? To answer the questions, I have asked myself several sub-questions. First of all, I combined Facebook and Instagram data together to have more diverse and interesting results. The first question is, who did I talk to the most? This graph shows people who I had more than 1,000 words conversations with me. As shown in the graph, Megan, my sister, is a person that I talk to the most. That's because unlike other people, I had constant conversations throughout the years with her. Then it's followed by my high school friends, Tiffany and Kara. Then Orchhna, Anton, and Karson, who are in this class right now. Then I asked, what relationship did I have with them and what language do I prefer now? This graph imports data from the above and visualizes the number of conversations I had with each individual in different time periods. As I told you earlier, I make new friends every year. The main reason is because eventually they always either move back to their country or go to different school. Then I tend to lose connections with them. This is shown in the graph where the first person that I talked to stopped talking to me from the end of 2017. Then the new friend, Grace, starts talking to me until mid-2018. Then throughout the senior years, I talked to Tiffany and Kara a lot. Then it suddenly drops because they moved to different uni. And then I made new friends with Orchhna and Anton and Karson. The next graph shows the amount of Koreans I used in the conversation. You can see almost all of my conversations were in Korean beginning until I stopped talking to Grace around mid-18. And it remains almost at zero while the number of conversations still increase. It shows that my preferred language has changed to English and I don't have many Korean friends left. Then this graph shows the individual's number of conversations separately. As you can see, Megan, who I constantly had conversations with, And the first person that I talked to the most, and then moved to Grace, then Tiffany and Cara, and my uni friends Karson, Orchhna, and Anton. Then I wanted to know like which words I've used, frequently used. So I took Megan's data as an example as I talked to her a lot. These are the amounts of we talked throughout the years. Megan talks more than me because I'm an introvert. I don't like talking. And these are the samples of data that I took. And this graph shows the words I use the most, the 40 words I use the most. It had a problem with the stop words, so it has a little bit of unnecessary words as well. But I was expecting to have more like swear words or conversations about poops, but it didn't really show because of that problem. As you can see, we only talk about coming home or the family problems, and we use lol every end of each sentences. And I made a word cloud to visualize it better. It also had more interesting words before, but because of the stop words, now there's a little bit of unnecessary words, as you can see. And then finally, I went to find out how long I stay in online or social media throughout the years. This can also visualize, help determine my approximate sleep time by looking at the gaps between the populated plots. This graph shows whole data from Facebook and Instagram. So you can see the gaps between these plots shows approximate sleep time. And I found out that there's a massive gap between 2016 and 17 till 2018 till 19. So I looked back at it and it was because I had 2 jobs during year 10s. I didn't have much time to hang out with my friends. And I had a really big drama during year 11. That's why I didn't really talk to people there. And as uni started, I started talking to more people. Yeah, and there's a big spike. I found it interesting because I barely had any sleep. So I zoomed into that, which shows in here, which was 2020 in September, which was during HSC. Then I realized I pulled all-nighters every day. That's why you can see I barely slept during those periods. And this is also a same graph but color-coded, so you can see different people who I talked to and who did I talk to the most. So through these different aspects showing from each graph, I was able to reflect back at my life and how I lived. The social media data shows just more than people I talk to, and it also shows the relationship I had with them and how I speak to different people and so on. I thought it was interesting to show you guys, and maybe in the future you guys can try and see how you lived your life as well. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
All right, cool. What happened to the stop words?
Oh, because I put a whole bunch of words. Oh, sorry. Oh, do I still screen share?
Yeah, you might as well, because people might want to go back and look at something.
I put a whole bunch before, but because I didn't save, something went wrong with the connecting to Jupyter and the VS Code. It just got deleted, so I only have the defaults left.
Right. Okay. Just for those people who haven't talked about stop words, can you just explain quickly what stop words are?
Oh, stop words. It gets rid of from the list because if you type it here, it will just get rid of from the list. So it only shows the data next after that. Oops.
Okay, cool. So did you discover anything about yourself that you didn't know from looking at this? Like I think that this one particularly is interesting. You can see that you wake up and you send a message, and then you go back to sleep again. Throughout most of like late 2018, all of 2019, there's that little bar just after the sleep that you kind of, yeah, just above there, where you've just got this straight line where you send a message and then go back to sleep again. Like these sorts of things, like there's kind of an interesting exploration in there of like, oh, what's going on? So if you had a bit more time, what would you look into next? Oh, you're muted. You've muted. You're muted.
Hello?
Oh, yeah, good. You're not muted now. What were you just saying? If you had a bit more time, what would you look into next?
Oh, then I would like take a specific week from like this interesting looking strike, and then I will analyze it more so you can see a time frame of when I was online and what time I specifically send messages to people. And I also want to change this y-axis to actual time frame if I knew how to do it and if I had more time.
Yeah. Kerry, what do you reckon? Have you got any thoughts?
Not. It was pretty interesting, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you show this data to your sister?
Yeah, I showed it to her, and she was laughing at her own messages that she sent to me.
Okay, cool. Well, if no one else has any, does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or anything like that? No? Oh, you're all so shy. The biggest thing that's going to make you guys like a force to be reckoned with is going to be your ability to like comment on each other's work, because you're all kind of in this together as you go through this course over the rest of the 3 years. You're going to be doing group work together. You're going to be doing individual work, but alongside each other. So you want to be able to critique each other's work and comment on how you reckon you can make it go further and all that sort of stuff. And it's, if you can get into that discussion, then it's pretty powerful.
So I did my data project on what was the most popular movies or IMDb since 1996 to 2020. And the reason I wanted to choose this data set is because I just really like watching movies in my spare time, and it's one of my hobbies. And where did I get this data set from? So I got it from IMDb's top 250 data set. So the Internet Movie Database is one of the most popular websites containing databases about movies and TV shows. In this data set, users' votes was used to determine the movie's ratings. First, I think this data set was reliable information for considering good movies. And this data set summarizes the top 250 movies for each release year of the movie since 1990 to the end of last year. And the question I wanted to ask was, what was the top 10 most popular movie genres throughout these years? And in this graph, you can see that the number one top rated movie genre was drama, and then followed by crime drama being second, crime thriller drama being third, and fourth being biography and history drama, fifth being war drama, which I was kind of surprised by this data, as I thought romance or comedy would be on top 5, but it was the following 6th and 7th. And this is just a pie chart visualizing the top 5 genres and this year. So drama in blue, crime in orange, crime thriller in green, and yeah, the following. And I also wanted to know, is there any correlations between movies' ratings and its runtime? And in this visualization graph, it is showing that the most of the movies lasted between 70 minutes and 180 minutes after eliminating the outliers. So ratings was usually between 7.5 out of 10 and 9.5 out of 10, with the majority of ratings above 8 out of 10, which I think was quite a high score. The 5.5 was an outlier, so I didn't calculate it in. And there is actually a correlation between the movie's ratings and its runtime, because movies that was too short in length correspondingly did have a lower rating, and this was also true for those movies that was too long. And the longest film lasted around 5 hours and 10 minutes, which was Gang of Wassapa, released in 2012, and it was in the genre of crime action drama. And I also wanted to know what was the gross revenue and running time of the movies. Yeah. So most movies had a duration of 2 hours, followed by 2 hours and 20 minutes. And most movies was worth between, most movies had a gross revenue between $0 to $400 million, which I was very surprised by this number, as like some movies did not make any profit. And I guess that kind of highlights like, although the movie business is very glamorous on the outside, but it is actually a very risky investment. And there is an increased trend of growth of movies released throughout the years from 1920 to 2020. Many movies was released in 1960 and 2000. However, this growth pattern significantly declined in the past 2 to 3 years. And that, I think, it might be due to COVID. A lot of movies did not want to be released into cinemas. Also, the top 3 highest rated movie from 1996 to 2020, after looking into the data set, I found out the first was the Shawshank Redemption, which belonged to the drama genre. The second was The Godfather, and it belongs to the genre of crime drama. The third was The Godfather Part 2, Dark Knight, and also Angry Man. So this was equal third, which respectively belong to crime drama, crime action drama, and crime drama again. And I also kind of wanted to know the scores, ratings, gross revenue, and runtime of each of the genres. This graph was a little bit too big to present onto the slideshow mode, so I just exited out. So in this box plots, I'm referring to the median at the minimum and maximum to have the view of the dispersion of the data around the median. This drama scored the most. The drama that scored the most was crime drama. And crime drama had the most dispersed rating, ranging from 7.5 to 9.5, with its median being 8.2 to 9, obtaining the highest rating out of all the genres. Romance dramas made the highest gross revenue, followed by war drama. And crime, biography, and romance dramas respectively ran the longest duration, while thrillers ran the shortest.
It's good that you started with like why you wanted to do movies. That's cool. It like shows that you've got a hobby of watching movies. I mean, do you have a particular type of movie you like watching?
I think it will be either like crime drama or romance. Yeah.
Right. I like that now you've got a vocabulary for how you describe it. It's like crime. Okay, cool. A couple of like quick presentation-y things. You can run your markdown slides so that they look like good text. So if you just click in, see where it says data project. If you just down at the bottom, down where it says data project, most popular movies, you just press Control Enter or click the run button up at the top. That will come out looking kind of like neat. There you go.
Oh, okay.
So that's cool. It's just a nice thing. On your like 4-plot mega plot, I think you like it makes sense sometimes to show them all together as 4, but I think in your case you should have just made 4 separate plots so you can show them on 4 separate screens.
Well, I realized that like the top 3 movie lists throughout the years, like I actually haven't watched any of them,
Yeah.
which I kind of feel bad about, and I think I might watch it throughout the holidays after this term.
Yeah. So one of the other questions I was going to ask is, you were saying that a lot of movies don't make any money, and the shorter movies tend not to do as well in terms of ratings. I was wondering if that's like art movies where there's no kind of intention for them to make money, and then IMDb might not be rating them because they don't get such a big audience or something like that. It would be interesting to see what that correlation is between length and rating, or whatever the score you were checking out there was. Yeah, that in that join plot, the next up a little bit, the one with the histogram on both sides. It's a really nice plot, but it's not clear. No, the one above that, I think. The one that's got the histogram sticking out the side and the top. Yeah, it's not super clear whether there is actually a relationship there or not, because the density of points there. I think in the Seaborn docs there's a demo on how to do a hex map with that. I don't know if that would be any help or not, but it was just interesting. It would be interesting to see if there really is a relationship between like how long the movie is and what the rating it got was, that kind of thing. Like how would you use this if you were a movie exec to say like, oh well, I want a crime drama that is an hour and 45 minutes long, because that's what our data shows is making the money at the moment. That'd be an interesting question.
Yeah.
The data set I was exploring is about the Uber travels in Sydney, and my aim is to find the answer of that. Does COVID impact the quality of daily travel with Ubers? And because of the data after the 2020 March are not available now, so in order to make a comparison, I just took the Q1's data of the 3 years. And firstly, importing the functions. And firstly, I started with a glance of the macroscope relationship between the data, and that is divided by weekdays and weekends. And this slide is reading the files because the Uber website only offers the aggregated data by quarters. So there's a lot of like preparation works. And then separately, we're gonna calculate the mean times of every Q1 of the 3 years. And this heap coding like here, just making the plot here. And we got these 2 figures. It's obvious to see a huge decrease in the early last year. And we all know that that period had a breakout of the cases. And the Sydney was in a knockdown. So the mean travel times on the March was about 2 minutes less than before on an average level. And next, I'm just looking the numbers by date of week. Still managed the road data and group it by day of week and got this plot. It shows a decline in the travel count on Tuesday in 2080 Q1, but the numbers in 2090 was much more crazy. I'm not sure how and why it's on that Tuesday. I checked the calendar of Sydney's festival and events, but there were too many events, so just forget that. But we can see a decrease in the line of 2020, which by almost 78,000 less than the 2019. And if we compare with the mean travel time by day of week, like this one, and we could have a rough understanding of the relationship. The travel times are always proportional to the number of cars on the roads. And for this plot, we can know a very basic and superficial things like driving on weekends is much more faster than that in the weekdays. And yeah, and we could also see a significant differences in the 2020s travel time, with the basically averaged on 1,200 seconds, and that is like 20 minutes, which took around like 1 minute less than the previous years on average. And then counts by the hours. This outcome shows that during the morning peak hour, there were no bunches of cars on the road, at least no Uber cars. And it's not difficult to explain the summit after the 10 p.m.s, because as we all know, Sydney, there's no public transportation after 10 p.m. So getting a taxi or Uber may be the only one choice. And the three lines are very close to each other, but it can be noted that the average count in 2020's first 3 months has reduced, and particularly in the morning to midday hours. And the figure shows a more evident decline in the times people spend on the cars with Uber. And then I extend something I extend the data system, but still got from the Uber side, because the Uber company sets the zero Kings rate as the absolute city center, and then divide two circles on the map to convey as a inner metro and outer metro range. The inner metro index zone are covers some neighborhoods and districts like Rosebery and Kensington. The outer metro index zone take the Ashfield, Maroubra, Chatswood, and South Coogee as the boundary, and we can see that there's two columns called source ID and destination ID at this data set. And the number 1 is the CBD area, the 2 is for the inner metro, and 3 for the outer metro circle. So I grouped those routes and made this figure. Basically, we can know that the fundamental travel time from CBD to inner metro zone is around 10 to 11 minutes. And from CBD to outer metro, it takes about 15 minutes. And from the inner region to outer region, cost to 8 to 9 minutes. But I think that is kind of unrealistic from my personal experience. But it's understandable because it was on the average level. And then I took a lot of process to reconfigure the data to check if the peak time delays have relieved the congestion on the road. And those data shows that on the morning, the AM peak from 7 to 9 and the PM peak from 4 to 6. That was drawn from the previous figures, and we can see the peak times drops at 2020 quarter ones very evidently. And finally, for the God's sake, I did something different from the previous coding, but still like turns me down actually. I took the all hourly aggregated data again, group it by the movement IDs and merge them into the Sydney map geometry data to, because that would give me the name of the locations. And I found that the most popular pickup locations are always the Haymarket, the Primark, Moore Park, and the airport zones. The numbers in the 3 years are very close to each other, and the top 5 locations are very stable at the same time. So I didn't make the plots for all the 3 years, but just generate a simple heat map here. And it's basically here. The reddest one is the airport zone, and this kind of area was the Haymarket and city center. And not surprisingly, the top 5 of the most frequent destination are the 5 locations again, and that is the heat map, although it looks like the same with the previous one. But I know it could be done more with the Drupenda things, and I was kind of enjoying the exploring, but it's just difficult. And that's all. For a conclusion, that the COVID-19 does relieve the travel times in the Sydney, but not in a very great extent. And thank you for watching.
Oh, thank you. All right, so I think that was an interesting idea. So the observation that travel times are down, because I would have expected travel times to be up because people are only taking Ubers for more important things. But I think the point goes quite nicely is that people haven't changed their behavior that much, but there are fewer other cars on the road, which makes it easier to drive around, which is kind of interesting. I think that variation in number of trips on Tuesdays is an interesting thing to look at. Like that makes no sense at all. Like the idea that you would have busy Tuesdays and then much less busy Tuesdays is kind of super strange. And it was very nice to hear that you'd enjoyed kind of exploring the data a bit. Let's have some questions here though. I think if you'd merged the data into one data frame and then used some group bys, it might have saved you a bit of typing. Like there were a few graphs where there was a lot of typing to produce the analysis, which is like brave, but maybe you could have been a bit more efficient. But I think that's something that you can kind of get to down the line. I think that's totally fine. It just means that, like, if you had, if you wanted to analyze 5 years worth of data, that's a lot of quarters to type up. I think it was really good that you chose the same colors and stuck with the same colors all the way through, because that was nice. I could go from graph to graph and know that yellow was 2020, for instance. Otherwise, it's a bit of a risk that you have to switch from graph to graph. What else? And it was good that you start with a solid question, like how does it affect the speed of travel? What do you think you would have done next if you had more time?
I would just like involve more cities of Australia, like comparison with the Melbourne, like Brisbane, and also like because the data, the raw data just directly download from the Uber website was kind of difficult to understand, and I took a long time to match them with each other and just like to understand.
Okay.
Okay, so my data set is about where my money is going and coming. A little background into why I chose this data set is because of a abbreviation that I learned recently, not really recently, for the past few years actually, is FIRE, which is financially independent retirement, retire early. So the first step of doing that is actually to understand your bank account and to see where your money is coming from and where they're going, which is why I chose this data set. Trying to understand my data, I look into, obviously data, and there's 5 columns, and the main column is actually the credit, debit, and transaction. The balance are pretty much useless because that changes based on how many money I have in my account at the time. But because the way I kind of use my account, it doesn't say much. Looking into the overall transaction, I plotted this graph of just per month, sum of every single kind of values per month to see the graph. And it was really interesting because for like majority of the past 2 years, they're pretty stable, but for like 2-3 times, they spike really high or they spike really low. There's like interesting point I'll kind of look at later on. But in order to kind of like look into data a bit more, I looked into the histogram of it to kind of see the distribution of money. And for the debit, which is money I spend, majority of them is actually under $500, and it's very rarely there's like the 5,000s and the 4,000s and like the 2,000s. And the same go with the credit. Majority of the money that I get back are like less than 500, which mainly from people paying me back from food or stuff like that. Diving down into the details. From this graph, obviously the first thing that we'll look into is February on the 2020 to see why is this so extreme compared to the rest of the data. But once I look into it, this is February by day, and I was able to see that only the 24th to the 28th is actually really extreme. The rest is very, very normal. So I kind of look into why it's so extreme in those 4 days. So from those 4 days, I can see that I have lots of $5,000 chunk being moved, and they're like stonks. It's my mom giving me money, and then I take more money out, and then I put into stocks. So from there, I can understand. Oh, I was putting money into investment stocks. So I decided to kind of remove that proportion, just look at the rest of the graph to see what's happening. What about the rest of the graph? I did a little word search to see, what I did, or like the main keyword, the word that appeared the most. But there was a lot of like random words, so I did a bit more cleanup. And after I cleaned it up, it comes into quite interesting is that there's international Phuket, there's Laguna, there's Singapore, and that's when I remember that I actually went overseas at like 2 years ago when COVID wasn't a thing yet. Completely forgot about that part. So I decided to look into my overseas kind of travel and the money I spent in overseas. Here is just me plotting, money spent on Phuket, international fees, which is basically me using my credit card, not my credit card, my bank account, overseas, which I shouldn't be using, and taxi. But then I remember that I actually the trip is actually longer than just half a month. So I look at the month before, and I was able to extract more data from it. And from here, I was able to extract the Singapore data too, where I went to Singapore before I went to Thailand. And then I plotted a kind of sum of the amount that I kind of spent over time within the whole trip. And we can see that I spend the most money on Phuket. Probably because of the amount of food and the activity I can do from there. But when I start putting into a ratio graph to see kind of like, what's the ratio of money I spend in this trip, actually 50% of it is actually spent on flights. There's a lot of money spent on flights, and I didn't expect that to be so high. Looking back into details again, right? I decided to check on to the second extremity, which is on October of 2019. Very similar to February, there's this really big spike where the credit and debit is basically the same. From previous experience, it's probably going to be stocks. So I did a search again, and it is. So I decided to leave it out for now, just to look at the rest of the data. And from here, there's still 3 really extreme points that's kind of poking out from the rest of the data. And I did search on them, and turned out they are Centrelink paying me, and me being paid for my jobs. I had a job back then, was something I completely forgot too, because COVID has been such a long thing. In this graph, I kind of plotted all my jobs and incomes from Centrelink and from my UNSW job and my pay intern. And from here, you can see, I ended my pay intern right at the start of this last year, which is my honors year for industrial design, my previous degree. So I stopped it there just to focus more on my degree. UNSW stopped hiring me because of COVID, which you can kind of see from this really flat increase of Centrelink payment, which is the COVID payment, where they kind of increase the amount to pay people for Centrelink money. And I plotted as kind of a sum of it. And over the 2 years span, Centrelink paid me actually quite a lot of money, like 20K. So like, if you can, claim Centrelinks while you're at first year, I recommend doing that, because in just 2 years, I got 20K. So, I have been claiming Centrelink for like 4 years. So that would be like 40Ks, and that's a lot of money. So that's my job, but where's the rest of my money coming from? I did lose kind of a self transaction, kind of look into like me transferring money from my saving account to my spending account. And I kind of grafted them together. A really interesting part is that the amount of money that I save is like 30K, but the amount of money that I taken from my saving account is like 34K. So in actuality, I only saved like $1,000 for the past 2 years. I did more search into it, disregarding those two, to see what about the other part of my money coming from. I did a word search on the names in general, or people who pay me. Interesting thing here is like Beams, which is a app for refunding people and paying people. So we kind of ignore that, and kind of put everyone's into a graph to see like everyone's name. And from this graph, I can see that Jeremy actually owed me the most. Well, he paid me back now, but he earned me the most during the past 2 years, with a large part of him being him, second being Jesslyn, and then Jen. Looking to the beam payment, actually can't see much because it just says beam payment, but we can see kind of the amount I get paid over time. This is per week, so there's 1 week in particular where I have spent lots of money for my friends, and they kind of all pay me back, and like that 1 week just like a lot of money used. But if I look into the histogram of it, most of them are like under $50, which is basically around food prices. But there's some that's really high, which I couldn't identify what they are. They just very high number of payment. In total, this is where my money is coming from. Is that jobs, Centrelink, a lot of saving, friend paying me back, and friend paying me back through Beamit. And then look, I went forward to kind of look, okay, well, I know where my money is coming from, but where's my money going?
Bit over.
Okay, yeah. So from this graph, I was just looking at. So yeah, I was looking at my stocks to see, like, well, where my stock is going. The amount of money I put into my stock was like 20K, and then look at area that I went to. This Eastwood. I went to that pretty frequently, but there's only one area where I didn't go, which is during COVID, and which is during the first lockdown of Sydney, and this little flat area. And if I look into the kind of the histogram of it, I have like really big chunk that I spend there. But if I kind of look into the ATM usage of it, they're actually kind of identical. So those are just me taking money out from Eastwood ATMs. And then look at the money that I spend at uni. Surprisingly, I spend a lot of money at uni, and they're very high. So I kind of look into the histogram of it. Most of them are for food, which is below 50, but there's some that's really high, like 100 to 300. I then kind of separated them into food and just for uni kind of fee in general. And the big one are mostly from UNSW library, which is like the workshop and buying material from it. And then I did a search in Amazon, just looking at me spending money on Amazon. It has been I haven't spent too much money for the past 2 years until like recently. I just started buying lots of stuff from Amazon, maybe because of the COVID again. And overall, I plotted a graph into seeing like where I spend most of my money. I can basically disregard the saving column because the amount I save and the amount I pull out from saving is basically the same. So I still man most of them as stocks, overseas travel, and eating and Amazon. That's it. Thank you.
All right, cool. I mean, it's really nice to see people like doing, I guess, autobiography through data. I think you kind of overestimated how fast you can talk about this stuff.
Yep, 100%. I didn't expect to be that long.
Let me see what we got notes wise. Yeah, it's nice to see the kind of like you totally took on the pattern that I intended for people in this thing, which is like look at a big set of data and then find something interesting and zoom in on it. You kind of zoomed in and zoomed out and zoomed in and zoomed out all the way through. I think it would be good to see some kind of like conclusion, I guess, for this, because you're like, I want to be financially independent and retire early, which is something I've never really understood. I want to retire in my 20s and then start working when I get to like 40 or something like that. It's like if I'm going to be decrepit and old and useless, I might as well go to work. Whereas while I'm young and beautiful, I want to just party. Anyway, so you are doing all this stuff. You're looking at where your stuff is going. The little flat spot around the first lockdown is really nice because it's like it matches up to something that's happening in the real world.
Yep.
Those ones. I think the filtering you did, like, oh, if I took out the stuff where I'm going like major, like internal transfers were something that kind of threw off a lot of your data. So I think it was good to show that you'd taken them out. Because I don't think I ever saw like an overall wealth graph.
No, yeah, the closest one is this one, which is all the in and out in total.
Yeah.
Per month, yeah.
And so there wasn't like a balance one.
I did a balance one, but then the balance one didn't actually say anything. It was just like, well, you have X amount of money in your account at this time, but it doesn't say like, oh,
because you're only doing one account, right? And you've got a savings account and a stocks account.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting, like one day to kind of do the same thing, but with your other two accounts as well.
100%, and then compare it. Yeah.
Here, like, oh, did I just move money around for no reason?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's your time.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
So I was originally going to do a data project analyzing some of my messages, but then realized I didn't really want my messages to be publicly available online in GitHub. So I pivoted to analyzing a data set which documented heritage listed government schools and items. So this data was recorded in 2020. Just move through it. Open this data. I've taken all these columns and stuff. Organizing the data. I took all these variables and put them in like a notepad so I could go to them later and use them in graphs. So first I graphed buildings by area in hectares. So you see there's one really big area of school area. It's heritage listed. And most of the other ones are relatively similar in size. So that was interesting. And I grouped them by, then I created a histogram with their Aboriginal area names. See the Radajuri and Anyuan and Yora areas stand out quite a lot. These areas around the coastal eastern New South Wales, and Barajuri is a little bit more west. But yeah, they're still side, and then moving along. I graphed what kind of heritage items have been recorded. We can see most of them were buildings, some were complexes, and very few were landscape and smaller items. Yeah. That's it.
Oh, sorry, you said that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, okay, so you've got this data set. What made you want to do schools?
I just thought it was interesting. Like just heritage schools. I thought they had quite a standout design.
Yeah.
Thought,
it's an interesting data set. I've not seen anyone do it before. And so can you just pop up the data frame again?
Yeah.
Can you show us just the top of the data? Yeah, that's that one. Just so we can see what the columns are. We've got the item name, heritage type name. That's called data entry state. Source significance. Okay. And did you have a look at the kind of things like what does the owner code mean?
The endorsed
no, the owner code says 16.
No.
Okay. And does that data set have any like geographical data in it?
No, it doesn't have any geographical data. It just has the suburbs and Aboriginal area names.
Okay, cool.
Local government area names. Yeah.
All right. I don't know if you'd be able to, but if you've got the suburb name, you could do something like the count of the items per suburb, and you could do a little map that would show, like, okay, this suburb has like 16. This suburb has 0. This suburb has 20. That kind of thing. That would be interesting. Yeah. Also, you seem to have discovered a kind of hack that I didn't know you could do. That if you do a histogram of a categorical variable, it gives you the value counts. But it's a bit of an odd way to do it, because histograms tend to be for continuous values. Yeah. The idea that you can change the bins. So you've got your area as a regular plot, and that would have been good as a histogram. And then your Aboriginal area and type of thing as a histogram, and they would have been good as a bar chart with value counts. And I think there's you could probably do a bit more in terms of exploring these columns and trying to come up with some kind of, I guess, looking into things like what is that very big area? What is that big area thing? Like, what are the top 5 areas that are listed? I'm guessing they're probably landscapes, right? Because it makes sense to have a very big landscape, whereas you can't really have a very small landscape.
Yeah.
It would just be good to see a bit more by Tuesday. kind of, I guess, try and tie it together with a bit of a story, if that makes sense. So that's like, okay, well, we're looking at these schools. Pull me through it so that I care about it, I guess. So what is your owner code? Who is Murray Mumbirid? I don't even see, it's too small. But is that a place or is that a person? You know what I mean? So
yeah.
You've got until Tuesday to kind of add a little bit of I guess story to this, and then it'll be kind of easier to follow it through. It'd be good to get. Go on.
I just had a question about like the Git collaboration part of this.
Yeah.
Is that
So the Git collaboration part, we've basically decided to drop it for this semester because it's just like the amount of confusion and stress caused by the just general lockdown stuff and that kind of thing is more than enough without adding extra stuff to the class. Most people are pretty much on top of Git now, so we were just going to sort of spread the rest of the marks out over that.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so I think I'll try to do the something with a map and plot those areas.
So you see, you've got that'd be great. You've got the suburbs in the addresses. Actually, there's also, you could potentially also do a geolocator thing on the addresses, so you can get the lat longs if you wanted to just put points down. There's a bunch of things. So let's talk about that a bit later on, and we can like put together a kind of what would be cool to do plan.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
No worries. Who's up next?
So hello everyone. Today I'll be presenting on the relationship between fuel stations and fuel depots. We'll have a look at whether fuel will be cheaper if a station is closer to a depot compared to the ones that aren't near one. So if it does, why would that be? Before we start, let's have a look at the data frame that I got from the beginning. The original dataset contains rows with nuns. Therefore, if you use iLog to fill the rows, you will only be able to see columns starting from field codes, and you won't know which address it belongs to. So then I have reshaped the data frame using for loops, creating new columns for the prices. Some of them still returned none because they didn't exist in the original data frame. And after that, you'll see the final data frame with longitude and latitude generated. Using Shapey, we've also created a new column called geometry, and we can use that for mapping. So with everything ready, we'll be able to plot some maps. In this map, it showed that the distribution of fuel depots in New South Wales. It indicates that Caltex owned the most fuel depots, followed by BP. The depots are mainly located in the rural areas. As you can see, there aren't a lot in Sydney or Newcastle. And the main reason might be due to the rental cost and the limited spaces in the city. It is more suitable to have one outside. But then this also raised a question about the delivery cost while when it requires to travel a long distance, which will also affect the fuel prices. The next map indicates the location of fuel stations and fuel depots. It shows that the population affects the demand of fuel. Most of the fuel stations are located in Sydney, Wollongong, and Newcastle, and they're kind of like spread it out in the inlands. The yellow dots represents the depots in this map, and as you can see, most of the depots in the rural areas, there will be one fuel station located around them. Next up, we'll have a map that colored with gradients to the value of the points. The darker the green is, the higher the fuel price. As you can see, it indicates that Sydney has the highest fuel price out of all New South Wales. The colors are spreading from Sydney coast out into the inner suburbs. Fuels are slightly cheaper in the rural areas. This shows that stations that are further away from fuel depots may result in a higher fuel price. So to fuel it in a more clearer way, I've grouped up all the fuel prices. The prices in Sydney and Wollongong are clearly in the highest group. And next up will be around Newcastle. And in the inner suburbs, fuel stations that are near a depot are in the minimum price range, which it is also cheaper than in the city. One thing to consider is, as majority of fuel depots are located in rural areas, fuel stations around those areas are actually generally cheaper. So next up, I have also created a folium map. Actually, because of the data on this map, it takes longer than usual to respond. So I've cropped out some important locations to show you how the location makes a difference. In this picture, this fuel station is located in Manly, which is, of course, is kind of like an expensive suburb, but like it is also the furthest away from a fuel depot, and the fuel price is in the highest group. This is another BP at Cabramatta, which is near a depot, and you can see a significant difference for the price. And then next up, we'll look at further away from Sydney. This is outside in Bathurst, and as you can see, fuel stations around fuel depots have a slightly lower price than in the city. And next one is another one in Bathurst. And one station at Lenny, which belong to Caltex, has a slightly higher price because it's not inside the area and it's not near a fuel depot. And lastly, there are exceptions if it's in rural areas, such as shown in the picture. In Cowra, even though the stations are near a depot, the prices are surprisingly in the higher group. One of the reasons why might be the location, or just because it has no competition in the area. So this is another location in Cowra, which has a similar price. So in the end, some of the fuel prices do get cheaper around fuel depots. However, I believe that the location determines the prices in New South Wales. In Sydney, the fuel depots are located in the west of Sydney around Parramatta, Cabramatta, and Campbelltown, and all the fuel prices are actually cheaper than near the coast. In CBD, the obvious reason for not owning a fuel depot is because of the spaces. But I suggest that delivery costs will be one of the factors why the city's fuel prices are more expensive than in the rural areas, since they don't have a depot around. Another consideration will be rental costs for the fuel stations in the city. That's why the prices will be different. Also, in rural areas, although fuel stations are around a depot, they do have like a cheaper fuel price, but I believe there are other factors affecting that. And I've done some research, showed that rural retailers take much longer time to run down their reserve due to demand. So they're selling older fuel. That's why the fuels are cheaper. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why their fuel prices are cheaper comparing to the city. So, but on the other hand, the city has more demand on fuel, so their fuels are more up to date. That could be the reason why the prices are higher, but it could still be the location because the delivery costs are so much higher. But after that, I've looked at who is controlling the prices near in the city, and I found out the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission are actually having a deliberate pricing policy. So they have like each quarter and cycle of fuel prices that report it. So at the end, fuel stations near a fuel depot will generally be cheaper. Might be the location because they can save up the delivery cost, but there are a lot of other factors to consider in the end. Thank you.
All right, cool. So, a couple of things. I think it was good that you had all those maps to begin with. It's very consistent, so you could focus on the information on the map, not looking at the map itself. I was actually surprised that the price range graph was so effective in communicating your point. And I think it was actually a very good graph, and I'm sorry I doubted you. So the question, I guess, that comes up would be, like, what is the factor that controls fuel price the best? And this is a kind of classic, not quite machine learning, but almost like proper stats question of when, if you were to do a graph of price versus distance from Sydney, price versus distance from depot, price versus, I don't know, population within 10 kilometers or something like that. Which of those factors has the strongest correlation, which gives you the best, like, R squared? It'd be interesting to see that, because, like, you were saying that the interesting thing was that yes, being near a depot does make it cheaper, but also all depots are far from Sydney, so it's hard to tell which is the factor that's actually doing it.
Yeah.
One question that came up in my head is, how does the fuel get to the depot? Like, someone has to drive it there, right?
Yeah. So drivers will deliver them will probably deliver them from the airport to the depot.
From Cornell, I guess. Okay, and then something you kind of skipped over, but I think is probably a major, like, programming challenge, was how did you decide which the furthest away from a fuel depot was? Which petrol station is furthest from a fuel depot?
Actually, I skipped that over because it was a challenge setting the location, like how to define which depot is closer to the stations. And I've tried using the lines to link, like, for example, if it's in between this area, all the stations will link to the depot. But at the end, I still couldn't figure it out.
Okay. So you used eyeball that one in Manly, or how did you get that?
Which one? No, because I was trying to substitute that with the Folio map.
Okay.
Because of the time, yeah.
Okay. All right. And what would you do next if you had a bit longer?
I would actually get all the data, because the data frame that I'm working it is not perfect at the moment, and I would probably sort out the data frame again, and then create a map with also stations and depots, but like I will show how each stations will link to one depot to see the location and how all the prices are.
Okay. And will a petrol station always get fuel from its closest depot, or will a Caltex one always go to its closest Caltex?
Yeah, I also thought about that, but like I can see how even though Caltex own the most fuel depots, their fuel prices are still the most highest ones.
That's how you get to own the most fuel depots. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about this? Amanda, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Jen, do you have any questions? I'm going to ask you because you've got your like emo appear offline badge.
What? No.
What? Do you have any questions or like thoughts about this analysis?
It's just interesting to know that there's cheaper fuel like closer to a depot, honestly, because I've never really thought about that.
It'd be interesting to know. So this is something that my grandparents would do a lot, is they would like work out which is the cheapest petrol station and drive around checking which was which. And it was like one quarter of 1 penny difference, but they would be like, oh, this is good, and they spend an hour driving around to find out. It'd be interesting to see like what's the kind of fringe where you could live that would make a difference being worth doing, if that makes sense. Like there must be somewhere where you can drive to a slightly further away petrol station and get cheaper fuel and it would actually still make sense. I don't know. Depends how much you value your time, right?
Well, you could also use more fuel before fueling them.
Oh, I mean run it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep your car at like 15% because you're not hauling 60 liters of fuel around with you.
I know in the eastern suburbs, at least, there's a fuel station in Bronte that's consistently 20 to 30 cents cheaper, like every day.
Yep. So for my data set, I looked into Airbnb Australia. Got a little stuck on it, but it's okay. My first thing that I kind of did when I looked at the data set was I just went through the names, just because curiosity's sakes. So overall, there was like a listing of around 32K of names, but I thought about this and I was like, there's absolutely no way there's that many unique names. So I kind of looked into that and I looked into removing all the duplicates. So the amount of unique names there was 7,500. But then from that doesn't really tell me how many actual hosts in Sydney there were. So, so I broke it down into their names and their host IDs, what aligns. And then I saw there's actually around 24.4K hosts in Sydney, which I thought was pretty interesting in comparison to the amount of listings there were. So from that, I kind of just looked into the most popular names just because why not? I found actually the most popular name was David, and most of them were actually male names opposed to female names. And I think this might be because of like safety matters, but I can't be too sure because that's based on an assumption. But from this, seeing that there were the most amount of names as David, I kind of went on this. Oh, wait, let's just go into overall locations first. I looked into like the overall locations of the listings in Sydney. So first of all, this is like far away view, what it looks like closer to how many Airbnb listings within the Sydney LGA. And then if you just compare the two, you can kind of see the outline of where it aligns here. And most of them are all around Mascot, Marrickville, like the central area, and less out in the west. So I tried to align it, didn't really work out. Kind of just cried a little, moved on. And so now I went into where are all the Davids? Because there were a lot of Davids. So breaking it down, just getting closer and closer. I found the most amount of Davids are actually around Kingsford, Bondi, Surrey, and Coogee. If you want to avoid Davids, don't go there. Another neighborhood analysis I did, there's actually 38 neighborhoods in terms of the Airbnb listings. And within the 38, the top 10 were Pittwater, Runga, Manly, North Sydney, Sydney, Woollera, Waverley, Randwick, Marrickville, and Rockdale. So I kind of just broke that down because I wanted to see what suburbs they were in. So predominantly they were actually in the northern suburbs. I wasn't too surprised about that, considering like the amount of people that I know around me who also rent out their homes for Airbnb purposes. But it was pretty equal to the eastern suburbs, which kind of makes sense as well, considering they have a waterway view sometimes. Yeah, and then in terms, I wasn't surprised that the most amount of listings was in Sydney. But when you say Sydney, it's the city of Sydney. But it wasn't very detailed in terms of that. So I kind of just looked into that again. Oh. Also, in terms of earlier, whilst looking through the overall locations, I realized that one of the most popular listing locations, oh dear, was very far out. Right here, you can see that. Warringah was kind of odd considering it was another one of the popular locations. So I kind of looked into that, like what's happening with the Warringah listings. And I actually found that the listings and the central location was extremely far apart. So either the listings aren't actually correct in terms of the centroid place, it just means like the Airbnb data is a little bit off in terms of neighborhood statistics. So just breaking that down now, this is kind of what I found out. In terms when they say Pittwater, the Pittwater region is way larger than expected. Likewise with the Manly, North Sydney, Sydney, and all the other locations, they kind of just grouped it very broadly. So I thought that was kind of interesting to find out. I went further into review listings and then the 10 most popular days. And whilst doing that, I kind of looked into whether or not it was a normal day or a public holiday. I found that most of them were normal days, but although they were normal days, they were followed after a public holiday, which makes sense. I wasn't too sure what was going on April 10th and 11th and what happened on March 28th. Upon further research for April 10th and 11th, this was mostly a weekend, but this is just a strange particular day. But what stood out to me was March 28th because it was just so out of the blue. I kind of just looked into that. I looked into that. I thought maybe it was because of the NAB Run West Festival. So I tried to look into the listing, seeing like if they were out west, but not shockingly, they were in Sydney and Waverley, so closer to the north and central side. So I kind of listed it out to see what was going on and what the main areas of interest were during that time. So there wasn't really much, but I thought there were quite a few around central Haymarket, Surrey, around the central Sydney area. So I tried to look into what was going on during that day. And I found out there was like a peace rally for there was a rally for the justice of refugees. So that could be potentially something that might have influenced the listings, but not 100% sure. Looked into Airbnb types because I myself was curious about what kind of Airbnb types were in Sydney, which was obviously home, apartment, and private rooms. I didn't expect to see shared rooms and hotel rooms as an Airbnb listing. So that was extremely interesting to me. And the neighborhoods based on apartments is kind of just what it looked like. So from that, I went to the average price of rooms. I found that typically within Sydney, the average price for an entire home, an apartment would be around close to $300. As you can see, private rooms, a little bit more than 100, shared rooms around 70-ish, and a hotel room, unsurprisingly, is around 200 something per night. So just a breakdown of the average price of locations. So as you see, the further north or east we go, the higher the price. And that's what I found out right now. And this is just a breakdown of all the prices per location. And I was hoping to actually plot this, but I could not figure out how. And that's pretty much it for now. Thank you.
All right. Cool. Anyone got any thoughts that they just desperately have to ask or say or whatever? Okay, so I think you kind of took the whole find something interesting and zoom in on it thing pretty much to heart. That was great. I'm always pleased when people do that. Your scatter plots and maps are a bit sad.
Yeah.
Given that you've got geographical data, you can just use GeoPandas and it'll all work out for you.
I really tried it, and it kept crashing my computer.
Oh man, that sucks.
And so I just cried.
Like the average price of neighborhoods thing is kind of interesting. It would be interesting to see that as a scatter plot between like distance from Sydney, distance from I don't know, the Opera House or something, and the price, and see if there's a relationship there. Like, do you get dips or something like that? The calendar plot was very nice. I have no idea how you did that. It looks useful. So the question I was wondering about the March 28th thing, was March 28th the 10th most popular day in the top 10?
Yeah, so in terms of days, let's just get it up really quickly. Hold up.
It's a
Let me
keyboard
just...
command to like show you the like overview of the whole thing, but I can never remember what it is.
I don't know how to break this down. Oh, I skipped it. That's why I didn't come up. So the most popular day, it was one of the top 10 popular days. So March 28th.
Yeah. So it's almost the end, right? So I bet if you were to look at the next top 10, they wouldn't be that different. Because 187 and 180 are actually still fairly similar. So I think the reason why you can't find anything really strong sticking out is because it just doesn't stick out. It's just like you're in the smooth section of the graph there.
Yeah. It was just like an odd day, honestly, from like when I was like just listing it out on the calendar, because I found that.
But it's a good observation to show that.
Even though it is an odd day, these guys are outliers. They do fall on weekends. So I thought that was like, I mean, that makes sense. But everything else just followed after. Yeah, holiday.
Like extend that to like the top 20 and see if that pattern continues. Like are the most popular days ones immediately following public holidays? That's a nice observation. That's the kind of thing that you would want if you were doing this kind of thing as a, like, let's say you're working for Airbnb and it's like, well, let's find something to do a deal about. I think just generally on presenting, probably just like settle down on the scrolling a bit. Like
it just kept on, because the just moments before I was presenting, my whole thing said like it stopped connecting, and so the slide type didn't save, so I had to like sporadically.
That's fine. It's just like presenting is one of those things that you just got to kind of rehearse a little bit. The graphs are nice, the maps are nice, the exploration of David's was nice. I'm interested in whether there are a lot of like multi-tenant landlords called David, or just a lot of people called David.
So in terms of that, my data, I kind of split it up to like unique names. There were a few names were paired together, but I did the search function for David, meaning should your name have the name David in it, it should be listed.
But you've got the host ID, right? And so if you were
to see how
if you did a unique on host IDs and then see if you've still got David's, do you end up with like maybe one guy called David owns like 500 properties, or maybe
how many properties does David own?
So like David's all over Sydney, but like how many Davids are there? And what's the second most popular name? That kind of thing. It's kind of an interesting question.
Second most was like James, but between James and David, like David had crazy.
They're all surprisingly Anglo names, actually.
Not actually that surprised.
Okay.
Like considering Airbnb is like, at least from like my point of view, I'm pretty sure the more popular, if it was like, there were a few East Asian names, and characters and whatnot. I tried to break that down, but to see where they were, but I just could not figure it out for the life of me.
Okay.
So I
mean, that's kind of a hard thing. You need projects, isn't that?
Yeah.
I think when we did it before, it showed that they were predominantly in the city of Sydney.
Yeah, that would make sense. Because it's closer to the unis and everything as well, and like where the city and shopping life is. But yeah, that's stuff.
Okay, so I looked into international travel data, and I basically looked into the to and from of Australia. So what's coming in and what's going out. And so I'll be presenting data contains the amount of freight, the amount of mail, and the amount of passengers that have come in and out of Australia since 1985. So I look at the data set. I'll just move my Teams thing. We can see there's a number of columns and rows here. And it basically shows the passengers, it shows everything coming in, everything coming out, and then it shows the totals. So it's pretty basic and it's broken down by month. So some info on the data set. So the data set's quite large. It has 82,499 rows or entries, 15. So the first thing I looked into was kind of, this is a bit of an ugly graph, but the kind of distribution of passengers and where people are coming from. So you can see the big ones are like Indonesia, New Zealand, USA, and these kind of make sense because they have a lot of ports, and obviously everyone goes to Bali. So the most popular domestic airport, so of course that's Sydney. And the reason I thought this one was interesting was because it reflects international airports, not domestic airports. So I thought it was quite interesting that Cairns came before Adelaide or Darwin, but then they don't get as much international travel. So it sort of makes sense because obviously Far North Queensland is very close to Papua New Guinea and the countries up there. So they would get a lot of international travel. And so the other thing I wanted to compare was kind of how travel has changed from 1985 to 2021, or I guess at least 2019, because 20 and 21 are a bit null and void sort of years, but 2019 was our last kind of proper travel year. And so basically I plotted the 10 top ports that are referenced in 1985, and you can see they're mainly European or American New Zealand is the top actually, but then when you use an aging continents, and so yeah, I think it's quite interesting the way it's sort of shifted, and we can see that later on with the map. So you can see the kind of plot of passengers. So these are the passengers coming in and out, and obviously there isn't much difference between these lines because most people come back home. It probably only differs a little bit for people that move overseas forever or go or come stay here, I guess. But the freight's quite interesting. I'm not sure what happened with the graph here. Went a bit askew, but you can definitely see the increase with the kind of sharp increase with online shopping as well, which I thought was quite interesting with the amount of freight. I would put it down to that. The mail was quite interesting. You can definitely see a decline, I think, with the introduction of smartphones. And I think what happened here was it became easier to message over the internet rather than to send a mail, because of course this is international travel, international data, and not domestic. So if it was domestic, I would expect mail to kind of fall out probably about the early 90s or so. And so here we can see, I guess the map is a little bit too small, but we can see the kind of, these are the destinations you could travel to or that had travel in 1985. And Yeah, mainly kind of European airports in America as well, and obviously a lot of Pacific Islands and the kind of South Pacific. But then when we have a look at 2019, there's a bunch more travel, and so now we're getting places in South America, getting a lot of attention in Asia, and also a lot more Pacific Islands as well, and a lot more international travel to New Zealand as well. And I put this down to kind of the shift in how we travel and the ways how far we can travel, because I think you can kind of see in the original map, I guess most people would sort of go to Singapore first and then fly to Europe or somewhere else. But now it's sort of more Dubai and all these kind of other little ports. And I think that's really been dictated by the kind of the A380 rise, the Dreamliner rise, and also kind of the shift, I guess, in maybe market share from Qantas and Emirates, and the way they kind of operate. But yeah, that's where I got up to. And that's my data set. Thank you.
All right. That wasn't as short as you made it out to be. Yeah, that was really interesting. It was nice to see these maps. It was an interesting thing. The graphs about freight and mail were interesting. I guess that says something about the consumption patterns and the types of the ways that Australia generates value, right? So in terms of freight, freight in, freight out, it's strange that they end up kind of similar in after 2015. Freight in, I don't know what the difference between freight in and freight out there is. It's kind of an interesting question. What's coming in that period? That might be when that would match up quite nicely with when Amazon wasn't in Australia, maybe. And that's people ordering stuff from overseas, but then you would have thought that would come in mail rather than in freight, but who knows? I thought those were interesting graphs. They just say something that I haven't thought about before. With your world maps, what were the colors in the countries showing?
They're all red, unfortunately. I couldn't change the country color. I wasn't sure how to, unfortunately.
The coloring in.
I think I could have made the countries all grey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I wasn't sure how to change that.
Something I noticed in the domestic airports was that Toowoomba Wellcamp is in there twice. And I just wondered if there was like maybe there are others that are in there more than once. They're just like getting the spellings consistent.
Oh, I actually pointed that out. A few of them had one of the years. Everything was, and I had to add a space to. I must have missed that one in the domestic because it had a space in it, and I should have gotten rid of it or changed it at least. But yeah, there was something strange about even Norfolk Island as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
that was a bit strange. Yeah.
But that's fine. It's just like there's a sort of processing step in there where you're like, okay, well, when it says that, show me this. When it says, that, and one of the kind of tired tropes, I guess, of doing data analysis is that 80% of the work is actually cleaning up the data. And I think you guys probably, because you've been working with such clean data sets, you probably spent 80% of your time on working with clean data. And so you sort of don't appreciate how hard it is actually to work with a sort of skanky data set that you've got from something you've collected yourself. But it's an interesting analysis. It would be interesting to see some way of doing, what do they call them? I think slope graphs of like how much more travel is being done, just in total, like how much more are people flying these days. It was interesting that there were no flights to Russia or West Africa, because that might show kind of difference in the way that they report travel, because you can't fly to London, but it's in the data set, right? But you can definitely fly from Australia to somewhere else where you're going to end up in Moscow, but it's not being recorded. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I think it might be that stopover thing. Maybe because Qantas has some kind of thing counter that is missing stuff. I don't know. Maybe because I don't change port the passengers. Perhaps I'm not sure.
Possibly, I'm not sure either. So can you just go to like those final maps? It'd be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see, just in general, thinking about it, like what's the diversity in number of airlines? Like, is that something you can get easily? Because I think the diversity in, I don't know, 1985 was probably only like 5 airlines that flew overseas, whereas now we were like 100 or something. But it's super interesting to see how many Asian cities have got direct flights versus how many had in 1985. In a very different world in 85.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Even New Zealand has a whole bunch more. Cool. What would you do if you were like passing this on to someone else? Like, here, you finish it off. What would you get them to look at?
If I was passing this on to someone else, I think it just dropped out a bit there.
Oh, if you were passing it on to someone else, what would you get them to do?
Yeah, I think I would get them to play around with the GeoPandas a bit more. I think I'd get them to work that out. Yeah, I think there's much more that can come out of this this data set. I think I did the best I could with the kind of my abilities that I was able to learn in the time. But yeah, I think I struggled a bit just with manipulating things and converting things, and yeah, I did my best. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying, like, what would you like make your minion do if you were gonna get them to do something?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think the interactive map is a really good thing I'd probably get someone to do as well. I think I saw some other people use the volume one, and I think it's nice to kind of pan around, because I find this map is a bit static, and the labels are hard to get the right size where you can read them, and it's annoying. But no, it's nice to sort of around a map. So that's what I'll probably look at next, I think.
Cool.
Right. So for my data project, I chose to analyze the New South Wales Public Schools master dataset. And this is a dataset that was collected by New South Wales Department of Education, and it contains data from the ABS, Department of Education's own surveys, and also ACARA, who's a group that's responsible for the Australian National Curriculum and also for NAPLAN. And they're pretty important for one of the columns that I'll be talking about here. The main question I wanted to answer is our education system fair? Fair, yeah. Okay, so here's the basic rundown of the data. You get the school's name, the school's ID, how to contact the school, and whatnot. I made a function here where you can search for a school, so I just used my school as an example. So yeah, so the main way I'll be judging fairness of schools is through this column, the ICSIA value. I'll get more into detail about the ICSIA values later on, but I wanted to see how other columns such as selective schooling, language percentages, Indigenous percentages, and enrollment numbers might affect ICSIA value. So how is ICSIA calculated? So ICSIA stands for Index of Community Social Education Advantage. It takes into consideration, so students in school would do surveys I don't know if you guys remember. I remember doing some of them, but the surveys ask you about your parents' background, education background, and also the occupation of your parents. The ICSIA value also takes into consideration proportion of Indigenous students in the school, the graphical location of the school, and basically any values below 800 are considered disadvantaged. 1000 is good, anything above 1000 is really good. So this is just me. So I just made a histogram of all the values, ICSIA values. Most of our schools are between 900 and 1000, which is good. It'd be better to see more of them at 1000. A couple of them are below 800, so a couple are disadvantaged. I zoomed in on them. It's good to see that they're mostly pushing towards 800, but more specifically, there are 58 disadvantaged schools in New South Wales. And just for a little bit of fun, I wanted to see what was the highest rated ICSIA and the lowest ICSIA value. Highest is James Roos at 1,237, and Tumila at 580 is the lowest, which is pretty low. Yeah. So yeah, the influences on ICSIA value, as I was told. So selected schools, language backgrounds, enrollments, and Indigenous percents. I wanted to see if these had any effect on a school's ICSIA. Starting with selective schools, we can see most selective schools are at 1,200, which is really good. And then a few of them are at 1,000, which is still really good. Partially selected schools would go from 1,000 to around 1,100, which is still very good. It looks like there are a few below 800. That isn't true. There's just the graph smoothing out, and I'll show you later on. Non-selective schools are usually at 900, with a much bigger range compared to fully selective and partially selective schools. So what this tells us is basically if you were able to get into a fully selective school or even partially selective school, you were likely going to a much more socially advantaged school compared to other people. So yeah, this is just showing partially selective schools. There are no results below 800. And then this is a scatter graph. I'll get into detail on some of these, but comparing all things. I'll only be looking into, I guess, the ICSIA value rows and columns. But an interesting thing to note here is that the Indigenous rows, everything is quite spread out, but Indigenous rows and Indigenous columns are a very evident downward slope, which is pretty interesting. So enrollment and ICSIA, we can see that the fully selective and partially selective schools have most enrollments, which is to be expected because there are 2,000 something non-selective schools and only 50 selective schools. So it makes sense that there's a lot higher demand for these schools. I'm guessing all the schools. So James Roos is over here. Tumila is over here. I'm guessing everything below 800 and like in this bracket over here, 0 to 250, are pretty rural schools. And I'm guessing everything up here is really prestigious schools who only accept a few students. And the bulk of usually most enrollments are at around 500-ish, which is pretty interesting. So seeing if language background affects ICSIA. Not really, I guess the answer is. If the data came up as less than 5, it was just recorded as no assigned number. So that's what all these zeros are. We can see that fully selected schools usually have a language background above 80%, with like 5 schools below 80. And this is a lot more spread out with partially and non-selective schools. And yeah, so there's not really much relation between language backgrounds and ICSIA values, but I guess if you wanted to, you would likely get into a better advantage school with 80% or higher. And Indigenous percentage. So this one is the biggest example of how something would affect ICSIA value. So as we can see, once your school reaches 40% Indigenous percentage, you are most likely going to be attending a disadvantaged school. Fully selective, partially selective school, well, all fully selective schools are below around maybe even 10%. Partially selective schools spread out. There's a outlier over here at 40, but again, nothing past 40. And yeah, most schools are between the 0 to 40, and once they go past 40, they're disadvantaged. We can see that there's the James Roos and Tumila are always on the opposite side of the spectrums. This kind of suggests to me that the way Ixia works kind of, I guess, pushes the fact that there is a right way to schooling and an incorrect way to schooling. So that's pretty interesting. And location of a school according to Ixia. So this is just so we can see that most selective schools are in the Sydney CBD with a few at Canberra, but they're getting drowned out by the non-selective ones. So I just got rid of the non-selectives for now. And yep, most of them are at Sydney, some Newcastle, and like a couple in Canberra. And when looking at disadvantaged schools locations, it's interesting to see that there's a couple of, I guess, circles where it's just almost like there's no disadvantaged schools. So a circle over here. There's 2 in Sydney CBD, which we can see later on. Canberra, there's like a small circle. There's a big circle here. I'm guessing that's just, there's nothing in there. And yeah, it's interesting that there's a lot towards Queensland. So I made a folium map that we can see what these schools are. So one's in Mortdale, and this is close to 800. One's in Blacktown, which I believe was, wow, okay. I thought it was close. Never mind. It is quite far away from 800. And yeah, so Tumila is over here, I believe. Ogabilla. Yeah. That's pretty interesting. So what we can see here, there's like a strip of disadvantaged schools along this coast, and I wanted to see if I could find out why that was there. So this is a graph from the ABS, and it's basically showing socioeconomic advantage according to suburbs. And what we can see here is that there's another big red strip of very disadvantaged suburbs in here. And we can see that it has a correlation between school location and the suburb, the socioeconomic advantage and disadvantage of a suburb. I'll try this, but it might break. Hopefully. So this will show us every school. Something that was interesting was that, yep. Oh, it's working. Okay, so North Sydney, which is a pretty well-known suburb for being quite wealthy. All the Ixia values are well above 1,000. Oh my god, most of them pushing towards 1,200. Well, what is happening? Okay, whatever. But as we move further away from the CBD and get towards, I guess, Orange and whatnot, we'll see that the value starts dropping. If I had more time, it would have been nice to get into this, but also it might just break my computer. So I'm just going to turn this off. So yeah, that was interesting. And let's run it. So what have I concluded with this? So if you attend any form of selective school, you are more educationally advantaged than most. Living in rural areas or disadvantaged suburbs means your school is also likely to be disadvantaged. Having high Indigenous percentage means that you were more educationally disadvantaged. Attending a school with more than 500 enrollments will likely put you in an advantaged school. Language backgrounds don't generally affect educational disadvantage. And yeah, thank you.
Right, nice. It's very thorough. The graph that you've got relatively near the beginning, where you say you've got like the big grid of graphs against each other. This one, which kind of gives you the like Ixia value, Indigenous percentage. That very strong trend, and then the like enrollment trends and that kind of thing. That kind of set you up very well for discovering something. I think that's a very useful graph to think through, and then all the maps that allowed you to explore that were very good. I think you made some interesting comments about the value of the Ixia value in general, because I think you looked into how it's calculated, right?
Yeah. So it's
and so yeah, go on.
guess ICSIA it only values social literacy and numeracy skills, which a lot of schools kind of don't really like because it's made by Akara, and a lot of schools already don't like Akara because of NAPLAN, since NAPLAN literally encourages schools to teach you for tests instead of teach you for education purposes. So that's why ICSIA is kind of a bad scale, because as we can see, yeah, Tumia and James Roos are always on the other side of the spectrum. So it kind of suggests that there's a correct way to schools and Tumia's doing it wrong. But that's not necessarily true, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. Does anyone else have any thoughts? I mean, you guys have all kind of very recently been at school, so you should have thoughts about this, right? I think the very neat graphs that kind of break out the colors depending on which type of schooling you've got, it makes it very clear that the things there were a couple of times you dropped a color where you dropped the non-selective,
yeah,
and your colors reset. So it'd be worth thinking at some point, about setting the colors explicitly. So when you drop that one, it doesn't, because you kind of get used to seeing non-selective as one color, and it's not particularly tricky to do. It's just it's just another line to put in. But yeah, it's good. Well done.
So my data project is focusing on the disparity between the US military spending and the rest of the world, and can a correlation be found between the spending and presidential approval rating? So I got my data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute for the military expenditure spending, and my presidential approval from the American presidency project. So this is what the crux of my spending data set looks like. It just has each country and their spending over each year, starting from 1949. There was a bunch of different sheets in this, going from current USD to per capita, all of which are in USD, which I'll be using. And this is the per capita one. Same layout, just with per capita money instead of billions of dollars. For the presidential approval, I just grabbed the approval ratings and disapproval ratings from Kennedy to Trump, because I'm not focusing on too much of the history. So my first plot is focusing on USA, China, Australia, France, Japan, and UK with total US spending, total spending in US dollars. And immediately you can see there is quite a large amount of spending coming from the United States of America. My data set only goes until 2020, but as of the end of 2020, they had spent $775 billion on military spending, with the second place being China on roughly 300. These countries down here are UK, Japan, France, and Australia, and they look like nothing. So if I were to remove China and America and just stack UK, Japan, France, Australia, Russia, India, and Germany, you can see that the rest of the world is actually quite close to each other. They're roughly spending $50 billion each, and there isn't a massive disparity between these countries. But then again, when you put on the United States and China, it can really begin to be apparent how much money they really are spending. So now I want to focus on a few key events that affected the reasoning behind these spending margins of the US and the ups and downs. There was the recession in 1990, which had this very small dip that you can see here. Keep in mind that small dip is roughly $30 billion. I'll get into that on the next slide. So spending really started to increase after 9/11. They were spending roughly $330 billion in 9/11, and up to the end of Bush's presidency and the end of the Iraq War in 2012, they had doubled that to $750 billion. Then Obama came in 2009. This is just after Obama came in, and there was a steady drop-off in spending under Obama. And then for not many reasons I could find, once Trump got in, that spending went up another $100 billion. So if I focus in on that little gap during the Depression in 1990, you can really see that whilst it looked like a little gap in the overall picture, that little gap is actually $30 billion. And then zooming in on Australia's spending with a nice background of America with a baby blue sky, we're only spending roughly $30 billion altogether. So as of 2020, Australia's total military spending in US dollars is the same as what the US lost in the 1990 depression. So now we can look at per capita, and things start to get a bit interesting with per capita. China and India up here are pretty small, given the fact that they have 1.3 billion people each. It's understandable, but the rest of the world starts to look a bit closer to America when you look at per capita spending. This is Germany, France, UK, and Australia, and America, and they are quite similar. But what I found very, very interesting was, given the fact that we have pretty much 15 times less of the population of America, we have only half of their per capita spending, which is extremely interesting. China down here, again, understandable why their per capita spending is so low. They have a very, very large population. But again, I was very surprised to see just how much Australia is spending per capita compared to the United States, given the massive population difference. So, can a correlation be seen between this military spending and American presidential approval? This is a graph of from Kennedy to Trump and their approval ratings, just colored for Democrat and Republican. It's hard to see much of a trend going on here, as it's pretty based on what's happening in history at the time, and there's a lot to look into that I just didn't have the time to focus on each of these presidents' approval rating. So I'm going to be focusing on from Bush and onwards. So plotting the military spending against the approval and disapproval rating of George W. Bush, approval being blue, you can really start to see the increase really begin after 9/11. Bush's approval rating went from roughly 50% to almost 90% just after 9/11, which really highlights the sheer amount of American nationalism, patriotism that happened at the time, like uniting against one leader against the common threat of American peace and life. So he began military action in Afghanistan and then warned that the war against terrorism only just began roughly 2002. And whilst his approval rating steadily declined throughout his presidency, the spending steadily increased. Focusing on Obama, you can see it did increase with his approval rating. However, Obama did like to focus on reducing this amount of spending that happened throughout Bush's 8 years. He made a nuclear weapon reduction agreement with Russia in mid of 2010. Osama bin Laden was famously killed in 2011, and then he announced the end of the Iraq War at the end of 2011. And just between these times, it makes sense why military spending began to drop. Now, this Y limitation is quite small compared to the Bush one, but as the drop is only roughly $60 billion, but keep in mind that is a drop more than any other country is spending bar China. So as it is now, it is a bit hard to see correlation between rating and spending. Then we look at Trump. Trump is the only graph where the disapproving rating is consistently at all stages of his presidency above the approving rating. He increased presence in Afghanistan at the beginning of his presidency. He withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal. Other things to note is that he shut down the pandemic office, which is pretty funny when you think about it now. And the Secretary of Defense resigned in roughly 2019. All whilst the military spending just kept going up. And we're all pretty aware of Trump's immigration reforms and his want to build $1 billion American-wide border wall. I couldn't really find many logical reasons as to why spending went up with Trump. But as this is in the bigger picture, to answer my question, which I originally wanted to answer, I can't really see a trend in approval rating versus military spending. But what I did find out, and the keen eye in you has been concentrating, is that there is actually a very scary trend with disapproval rating and military spending. Throughout Bush's campaign, his disapproval rating obviously was very low given straight after the 9/11 attacks, but as the military spending went up, so did the disapproval rating. And if Obama wasn't as approved of at the start of his campaign, his disapproval rating follows the military spending quite closely as well. And I think this has a lot to do with the media's portrayal of what the American military do and like the sense of nationalism kind of going down after 9/11. In 2003, Bush took military action against Iraq. He then he reduced the amount of tax cuts that he was originally going to make from $700 billion to $300 billion to pump another $300 billion into the war against Iraq. He increased troops in Iraq. He made an anti-terrorism bill. Obama was heavily scrutinized against his drone strikes against the Middle East in roughly 2012. They put sanctions on Russia, and he made a lot of talks against the chemical weapon uses in Syria. And all of this adds up to negative media towards what the United States military really do. And I think that if I remove Trump here, because his disapproval rating is pretty benign, because a lot of people disapproved of him, you really can see a trend of disapproving versus military spending. So to conclude, I think it's painfully obvious that the United States spends a monstrous amount of money on military. Opposed to what I assumed at the start, the only times where the approval matches the spending is during states of emergency, where the people can unite under one viewpoint, such as 9/11. But a trend can rarely be seen with disapproval, as the presidents at the time only perpetuate the spending, whilst the logical voters who want a peaceful outcome and listen to the media knowing what their military do, they understand that there's no peaceful outcome from their military. And I think that makes sense why disapproval seems to match an increased amount of spending. Thanks for listening.
Well, I think that was excellent. I think you've really kind of dug into that pretty hard and made a pretty compelling argument. I'm not totally convinced that disapproval and military spending are strongly correlated, but I'm very open to being convinced a bit more. So that's good. So take me back. Just scroll back up through that. I just wanted to. There were a couple of things I was interested in. I think your use of you didn't tend to use numbers without then putting them in context with some other number, which was extremely good practice. You'd be like, okay, this little dip here is more than anyone else is spending at all. That kind of thing. That was great. The per cap stuff I thought was really interesting because the Americans still spend more per cap than anyone else. So what are they? Why are they doing that? Like, given that Americans have such a low tax rate, they're spending even more per dollar of tax that they bring in. So the proportion of tax that's going to essential services must be lower in the States. I think the fact that Australia spends so much per capita on military is kind of interesting. It shouldn't make a difference once you've normalized per cap on military spending. You should kind of expect smaller countries to have higher per capita military spending because, like, with 1 billion people, you only have to put in like 10 cents to buy a tank, whereas with like 100 people, you've got to buy a tank personally.
I do regret not focusing on that. I should have compared Australia to other countries, not America, because given the population of the UK, France, Germany, Australia is still impressively up there versus them.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting thing to look at. I mean, you had to make some editorial decisions, right? So you can't talk about everything, but it is interesting to see this kind of consistent amount of money to spend on the military. And I wonder, the interesting thing was that Trump's kind of rhetoric throughout his presidency was that he was going to pull out and stop spending money because America was America first. And so it's interesting that given that he's not doing any like military stuff according to his rhetoric, that he's still spending more money than anyone's ever spent on the military. Right. Has anyone got any comments or questions or anything like that? This is a fascinating look into the way that people spend your tax dollars.
All right. Mine was how did the US debt get so high? Yeah, so I think I talked a lot with Max as well because we were sort of doing 2 US data sets. But so yeah, I was analyzing the monthly statement of public debt in USD. So yeah, It was good. I had a CSV for a little bit, but because some of the data coming out even in the past few months has been very eye-opening as well. I did an API request. I formatted it so it pulled it, sort of loaded it every time from the internet, so it made it a little bit easier to get updated data. I had to make a definition of terms because a couple things are they're hard to figure out and keep track of what the bills, notes, and bonds, treasury stuff they actually do, but that's not as important right now. So this was how my data was formatted, and it came in about 15 rows, and there's 341 of these rows along that lines. The most important parts are it comes in dates, and it comes once every month. Got the security type description, whether it's marketable or non-marketable, and what the class is made of, bills, notes, bonds. The way I plotted it was I took a look at the record date, where I wanted it to be. So let's say it was record date. I wanted to look at total marketable. Look at total marketable, and then I'd look at the total millions amount. This would be public, government, and total amount. This isn't so important, but it was interesting to see like the minimums and maximums. Like the maximum amount of debt held by the public is 22 trillion, while the government only holds about $6 trillion worth, and then total is about 28.5 trillion. Context graph. So this shows, what is it? March 1st was when the US government hit $28 trillion worth of debt. As you can see, sort of from 2001, which is where the information starts, it goes up, 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 and it hasn't really gone down. So I wanted to look a little bit into why that was, what certain events caused that, and why hasn't it really gone down. So I divided it up into total marketable debt versus non-marketable. Marketable you can sell, and non-marketable is you can't sell. So let's say it's a fancy piece of equipment that fixes your car versus going somewhere and selling a candy bar. That it's much, much easier to sell than this one. So sort of everything was going good 2001 to about 2008, and then there's a marked diversion between non-marketable debt and marketable debt that the US government holds, or the US public as well. I think we all know what happened in 2008, which was the GFC. So the GFC didn't actually start, or hasn't been indicated that it's actually started until 2009, September. So even before then, there was a couple indicators that something wasn't going right, and debt was just sort of skyrocketing. So yeah, as you can see, it started about July 2008. The reason this happened was there was a couple markers. A mortgage company imploded, one of the biggest ones in 2007, and then midway through 2008, Bush signed a quantitative easing bill, which first it was about, they started playing around like 50 billion, 60 billion, stuff like that, to sort of keep the US markets going well, while everyone was like, look, all these mortgage brokers and subprime stuff are failing. So Bush pumps 500 billion, 700 billion into the market with the quantitative easing bill. And then he puts in another 1.7 trillion over this space of time with another signing of legislation. But it doesn't all happen at once, so it doesn't get straight pumped in, which is why you see it steadily rising. So all of this information shows it's only been on a steady increase. Here's divided into the total amount versus the non-marketable debt and marketable debt. You can see the rise here is just with marketable debt. So this is stuff that they can sell on the markets quick as possible. So you're thinking, I mean, surely after the financial crisis, the government settled some of its debt, seeing as the GDP ratio is at 91%. So they only have 9% profit at the end of each financial year to sort of put into different funds and things like that to make sure everything is going smoothly as possible. You would be wrong. So the Bush administration finished 2009 on the 31st of January, around that time, and Obama was inaugurated. So Obama came in right before the GFC officially even started. So he had a whole bunch of stuff he had to do to fix the economy because everyone was not happy and they could see it going straight downhill. So Obama's term did the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So over that time, he inherited a $10.6 trillion debt, and he left with $20 trillion. So I think the U.S. American Recovery and Reinvestment Act added about $8 trillion worth, and then there was another $2 trillion for Social Security and housing and mortgages and stuff like that. But the entire time it has been operating under a deficit. They haven't been able to. They've been spending more money than they have. So this continues in like he left office with a GDP ratio of 104%. So they are now operating at a 4% deficit every year on year because they're not able to make enough money back. That's between tax cuts and pumping more money into the economy. Trump inherits the debt with 20 trillion and he pumps it up to almost 28 trillion in a 4-year span. Like, oh, okay. I mean, that graph that graph looks a little bit better than Obama's graph, right? You'd be wrong. Here is over an 8-year period, it was sort of just slow and steady, and with policy, he was able to sort of keep it even keeled. But with Trump, he didn't really do too much. He started spending a lot around 2017, 2018, but you had the real big increase around halfway through 2019. And if we look, that's right about when COVID started. So they knew a little bit. It wasn't until November, I think, that people heard whisperings of it. But yeah, they were already on the train. Biden comes in at 2021. And between July and January, they pump $6.5 trillion into the economy. No, 5.5. So we're at 22 and ends about $27.5 trillion. Yeah, so the debt to GDP ratio is now at 129%, and they're operating at a 30% deficit year on year. So it doesn't look like it's going to go down. Total volume, just for more context at the end, this was as of last month. They're at $28.5 trillion. The debt has not decreased, and so far everything that they've done in times of crisis has been to pump the economy because they are the world reserve currency. A government backs their currency with US dollars. They have to be able to, say, maintain value with their own currency. So 40% of their reserve is US dollars. The only problem is with the US debt increasing and increasing and increasing, how much is that money really worth considering how much is in circulation now? I think that's sort of the big question that people are coming to right now. I think Russia, Cuba, a couple other places are starting to pull US dollars from their reserve banks because they're kind of questioning how much is it really worth right now. Yeah, so I guess the conclusion is, how has America managed to maintain such a high deficit without defaulting? The people still trust the USA. The globe still trusts the USA, and they are tied into how the world operates on a global scale in terms of economy. They believe the US will pay their debts, known as risk-free credit. America has never once defaulted on its debts. Why start now? The only problem is, as of this month, the US debt, the ceiling hasn't been raised and Congress has gone on vacation. They have $400 billion left in their budget for the year, which I think they spend about $20 billion per day. So they're not on a really good timeline right now. As you can see here, this is what happens in times of crises. So you've got the 2008 financial crisis here, and you've got COVID. So notes are 30-year investments, essentially. You buy them for $90, they buy them back at $100, and every 6 months they pay you interest, which is the difference between the $90 and $100. Notes have slowly and steadily increased in their purchasing amount, and that shows people have faith in the American economy. Bills are bought, and they're at the latest a year maturation. So they can be anywhere from 2, 4, 6, 13, 26, or 52 weeks. So in times of crises, people buy a lot of short-term bonds because they're worried about volatility. They want to be sure they're going to get their monies within the next year. And as you can see, that's what happened exactly with COVID. Over time, times of crisis, a lot less of notes are bought, and then in times of peacetime, a lot of notes are bought. So it shows, where people's sentiment is at. I think for my final graph, it was, it's a closer indication of what is happening during those times. So you've got about 2008, a lot of notes are bought, and a lot of so notes have changed color here. So a lot of bills are bought. 2008, 2009, notes dropped to nothing because no one believes that the economy is actually going well, and they're not sure about the future of America. Then bills slowly drop, and people, oh look, they've managed to handle the crisis. It's been good. It's been good. Only difference here is, even before COVID happened, a lot of people weren't buying bills anymore. They started buying notes, which is like, oh, okay, the US is going to do really well in the next 30 years. But in the short term, there's a questionable amount that isn't being bought. And then the federal financing bank they hold a certain amount. They provide funding for all government programs. That would be through like Social Security and things like that. So what they did is they sold a whole bunch of their debt to the other government departments to allow them to get more funding and do the things that they needed to do while America was in turmoil. And then they bought it all back at the end to pretty much make it easier for the government departments to get funding that wasn't privately operated, like through a bank or things like that. And as you can see here, they've done the same thing, except they haven't bought the debt back yet. So things they're not sure what's happening. It hasn't reached the level of debt up until 2013, which was still covering for how much they had to pay and stuff in 2009. But I think that is the end of my presentation.
That's super interesting. The whole idea that they're going to run out of money before they come back from their holidays is kind of amazing. Can you imagine another job where you're just like, hey, I know I've got some holiday booked, but everything's going to fall apart while I'm away. And you'd be like, okay, see you later.
You'd think they would do the opposite. You'd think they would stay, but it's insane. Everyone is really amazed by it.
Well, I mean, just in the last few years, they've had government shutdowns every year. So
exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. It looks like Declan has fallen asleep or something. So if anyone knows where he is, get him to get in touch, and I'll get him to present later. Thank you all for presenting. It's been super interesting, and I love this day, this opportunity to see a bunch of like otherwise things that I wouldn't look at presented in a way that makes them all really interesting. So I hope you've had a good time investigating this stuff. I hope you've feel like you've now got some more power in your fingertips, that you can kind of do magic stuff by saying, oh, I know the answer to this problem. I can investigate it in this new method that I've learned. And I hope that this is a skill that you can take on and use in your other courses or in the rest of your life, or whatever. And that it will allow you to solve some interesting problems over the next, 10, 15 years. Until you get so senior that you don't do any work, you just go to meetings. And it's been great. Sorry we had to go remote again. It was really nice having a classroom for a couple of weeks. And if anyone wants to fill in my experience report, if you haven't, do that, because the university cares about almost nothing more than my experience reports. So that would be great. And let me try to think of other things. Oh, I'm also going to run a workshop in a few weeks' time about making a website. So I'll let you all know when that's happening. And have a great time.